My brother sent me 3 demands I had to meet before I was allowed to attend his wedding. Complete them all, and maybe you will be worthy of standing beside us. I just laughed, booked a flight to Nusa Dua, and sent him one final gift. When he opened it in front of every guest, his face turned pale. My name is Riley, and I am 30 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The clinking of crystal glasses and the hushed, affluent conversations of Manhattan elite surrounded us in the dimly lit dining room of a Michelin-starred restaurant. The air smelled of expensive truffles and aged wine. I sat with my posture perfectly straight, my hands resting quietly on the pristine white tablecloth. Across from me sat my older brother Spencer and his fiancée Jada. Jada was a stunning African-American woman from a wildly wealthy and established family. She built her career as a high-profile influencer and socialite, curating a life of absolute perfection for her 2 million online followers. Tonight, she wore a designer silk dress that likely cost more than my first car. She refused to even look at me. Instead, she stared intently at her perfectly manicured nails, her face set in an icy mask of disapproval. Without a word, Jada reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick sheet of premium paper. She slid it across the white tablecloth until it rested directly in front of me. Bold black letters at the top of the page read, "Contract of Attendance." I stared at the document, a genuine mix of amusement and disbelief rising in my chest. Before I could even ask what this absurd piece of paper was, Spencer leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He was 34 years old, the undisputed golden child of our family, and he wore his arrogance like a tailored suit. "You are lucky we are even considering letting you come to this wedding, Riley," Spencer said, his voice dropping into that cold, authoritative tone he always used when trying to assert dominance. "But Jada and I have a very specific vision for our special day. Her family has a certain standard, and we cannot afford any embarrassments. If you want a seat at the reception, you need to agree to these terms. It is non-negotiable." I kept my expression entirely neutral, not giving him the satisfaction of seeing my shock. I looked down at the printed words. There were 3 bullet points. "Read it carefully," Spencer instructed, swirling the red wine in his glass. "Demand number 1. You will pay the $35,000 bill for the exclusive rehearsal dinner we have planned for the night before the wedding." I raised an eyebrow, looking from the paper to my brother. $35,000 for a dinner? "You are single with no real responsibilities," Spencer sneered, completely mischaracterizing my life. "You have no husband, no children, and no mortgage to worry about. You owe this to the family. Consider it your way of paying Mom and Dad back for all the grief you caused them when you were younger. I have an image to uphold as a vice president at my hedge fund, and Jada's family expects nothing but the best. You are going to cover this cost, or you can forget about showing your face." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, and the second demand I asked calmly. Jada finally looked up from her nails, her dark eyes locking onto mine with absolute disdain. "You will wear a long-sleeved, high-necked dress," she dictated, her voice sharp and perfectly modulated. "You will dye your hair a normal, natural color. You will cover every single one of those hideous tattoos on your arms. My wedding is going to be featured in a major bridal magazine, and my luxury aesthetic will not be ruined by your rebellious phase. Furthermore, you will be seated at a corner table near the kitchen with our distant relatives. I will not have you in the main photographs or anywhere near the head table." I looked at my arms, where intricate ink designs told the story of my survival and independence. They were beautiful, but to Jada and Spencer they were just another reason to hide me away, like a dirty secret. "And the third demand," I asked, my voice remaining perfectly even despite the fire igniting in my chest. Spencer smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He tapped the bottom of the paper with his index finger. "You will sign over your 10% share of our late grandfather's estate to me. I need full ownership of that land." I stared at him, letting the sheer audacity of his demand sink in. When our grandfather passed away, he left 90% of his sprawling estate to Spencer, the golden grandson, and a mere 10% to me. It was a token gesture, but it was mine legally and rightfully. You want me to sign over my inheritance as a wedding gift? I clarified, keeping my tone conversational. Exactly, Spencer said, leaning back in his chair with a smug, self-satisfied grin. It is useless to you anyway. You handle crisis public relations for canceled celebrities and messy brands. What do you need prime real estate for? I need that land to build a custom home that meets the standards of Jada's family. It is the only logical step for my portfolio. His sheer entitlement was staggering. He sat across from me, demanding $35,000, stripping me of my identity at his wedding and extorting my only piece of family inheritance. He treated it as if he were doing me a massive favor by allowing me to breathe the same air as his wealthy future in-laws. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He still saw the 18-year-old girl who ran away from home to escape their toxic expectations. He did not see the woman who had built a ruthless, highly lucrative corporate empire from the ground up. He did not know my public relations firm was only a fraction of my portfolio. He had absolutely no clue that I specialized in acquiring and restructuring high-yield distressed private debt through a blind company. Spencer reached into the inner pocket of his expensive suit jacket and pulled out a heavy gold pen. He placed it deliberately on top of the contract of attendance, the metallic clink cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant. Sign the deed, Spencer commanded, his eyes completely devoid of warmth or brotherly affection. Pay the restaurant deposit tonight, and you can come to the wedding. Do not make scenes. Spencer sat back waiting for my compliance. Before I could even draw a breath to respond to his absurd list of demands, a manicured hand reached across my line of sight. My mother Patricia grabbed the bottle of Cabernet sitting between us and topped off her crystal glass. She did not ask if anyone else wanted more. She took a long, deliberate sip, leaving a dark smudge of expensive lipstick on the rim, and leveled her gaze at me. Just sign it! Riley! Patricia scoffed, waving her hand dismissively as if we were discussing what to order for dessert instead of my financial extortion. Spencer is a vice president at a hedge fund now. He needs that land to build a home suitable for Jada and her family standards. It is the only sensible thing to do. You just handle public relations for canceled celebrities and messy brands. What could you possibly need a prime piece of real estate for? I stared at my mother, feeling that familiar icy knot tighten in my stomach. 30 years of my life had been defined by that exact tone of voice. The casual cruelty, the effortless way she could reduce my entire existence to a joke. My company was a highly respected boutique firm handling multi-million-dollar crisis management accounts. I worked 70-hour weeks to build it from nothing. But to her, I was still just the rebellious teenager playing business, while Spencer was the conquering hero. Spencer smirked, adjusting his silk tie. Mom is right, Riley. You live in a tiny apartment downtown. Jada and I are planning a massive estate in the Hamptons. We need the equity from that land to secure the construction loans. You keeping your 10% is just holding up progress for no reason other than spite. Spite, I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. You call it spite, Spencer. I call it the only thing I have left from Grandpa. I looked directly at my parents. You cut me off the day I turned 18 because I refused to study law. You took my college fund, the car I saved up for, and told me to figure it out myself. And I did. I built my life with zero help from you. Meanwhile, you bankrolled Spencer through 3 different universities, paid off his luxury cars, and covered his rent until he was 30. And now you expect me to fund his rehearsal dinner and hand over my only inheritance. My father Richard had been silent until now, methodically cutting his steak. He placed his silver knife down with a sharp clatter that made the nearby tables glance over. He leaned forward, his face flushed with sudden anger. You listen to me, young lady, Richard hissed, his voice low and threatening. We are sitting at this table with Jada, whose family is practically royalty in this city. You will not embarrass us. You will not drag up ancient history about college funds. You made your bed when you walked out on this family traditions. Your brother is marrying into a prestigious dynasty, and you are going to play your part perfectly. You are going to sign that deed, pay for the dinner, and cover your tattoos. If you refuse, or if you dare make a scene and humiliate us in front of the in-laws, I will formally disown you. You will be completely cut off from this family." I wanted to laugh. Cut off from the family, as if that threat held any value to me anymore. I had spent the last decade building a reputation entirely separate from their toxic shadow. They had no idea that their precious, prestigious son was currently drowning in debt, or that I was the very person holding the leash. They were blinded by the glittering illusion of Jada's socialite status and Spencer's fabricated hedge fund success. "You are being selfish, Riley," Patricia added, her voice dripping with fake disappointment. "This is Spencer's moment. Why must you always try to ruin things for him? Just write the check for the restaurant and sign the paper. It is $35,000. If your little public relations business is doing as well as you claim, that should be pocket change for you. Or are you just lying to impress us?" They were trying to trap me. If I said I could not afford it, they would mock my career and validate their belief that I was a failure. If I paid it, I would be submitting to their extortion and funding my own humiliation. It was the exact same psychological warfare they had used since we were children. Spencer was allowed to fail upward, constantly cushioned by their endless bank accounts, while I was punished for every independent breath I took. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Jada shifted in her seat. She lifted her wrist, the heavy diamond bracelet catching the ambient light of the restaurant, and conspicuously checked her gold Rolex. She let out an exaggerated theatrical sigh. "I do not have all night to wait for your sister to find her checkbook, Spencer," Jada said, her voice laced with profound boredom. Her gaze flicked toward me, holding nothing but pure condescension. "We have a tasting with the wedding cake designer at 9 in the morning, and the photographer needs final approval on the lighting aesthetic for the reception. Either she signs the contract right now or we revoke the invitation entirely. I am not going to let a stubborn relative ruin the energy of my bridal week." Spencer smiled reassuringly at his fiancée, patting her hand. "Do not worry, babe. Riley knows what is best for her. She knows she cannot afford to cross Dad." He turned his arrogant gaze back to me, tapping the heavy gold pen he had placed on top of the contract. "Go ahead, Riley. The waiter will be over with the bill for tonight's dinner shortly. You can put the rehearsal dinner deposit on the same card. Make it quick." I looked at the pen resting on the pristine white paper. I looked at the $35,000 demand. I looked at the clause demanding my grandfather's land. I reached out slowly. My fingers brushed the cool metal of the pen. Spencer's smile widened into a victorious grin. My mother took another satisfied sip of her wine. My father nodded, pleased that order had been restored. I picked up the pen. But instead of signing my name on the dotted line, I grabbed the metal cap resting beside the contract, placed it firmly over the ink tip, and snapped it shut with a loud, definitive click. The soft click of the pen cap snapping shut echoed like a gunshot over our table. The smug satisfaction that had been resting on my brother's face instantly dissolved into raw confusion. Beside him, Jada let out a sharp breath, her perfect posture stiffening. My mother halted her wineglass halfway to her lips, and my father's heavy scowl deepened into a glare. I placed the heavy gold pen back onto the crisp white tablecloth. I did not rush. I took my time, letting the silence stretch until the tension in the private alcove became suffocating. I looked down at the restaurant invoice demanding $35,000 for a rehearsal dinner I did not even want to attend. Then I looked at the legal deed, the document that would sign away my 10% share of our grandfather's estate, the only tangible thing tying me to my family's legacy. Using 2 fingers, I slowly slid both pieces of paper back across the table. They came to a rest right next to Spencer's clenched hand. "I will not sign," I said, my voice completely steady and stripped of any emotion. "And I will not pay a single dime. Have a nice wedding." For a split second, nobody moved. The sheer audacity of my refusal seemed to short-circuit my family's collective brain. They were so accustomed to my compliance, or at least my eventual surrender under pressure, that a flat, absolute denial was incomprehensible to them. Then the explosion happened. Spencer slammed his fist onto the table with such violent force that the expensive crystal wine glasses rattled dangerously against each other. A splash of red wine leaped from my mother's glass, staining the pristine white tablecloth like a fresh wound. "Who do you think you are talking to?" Spencer roared, his voice bouncing off the acoustic panels of the private dining room. His face flushed a dark, angry crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against his tailored silk collar. "You do not get to say no. You do not get to walk away from your obligations to this family. You will pay for that dinner and you will give me that land." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs. "I do not have obligations to people who treat me like an open wallet and a dirty secret," I replied calmly. "You want a luxury wedding, Spencer? Pay for it yourself." My father slammed his hands flat on the table, leaning his massive frame toward me. "You ungrateful brat!" Richard spat out his voice, a low, terrifying growl. "Your brother is stepping into high society. He is marrying into a family of immense prestige. You are deliberately trying to sabotage his future because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of his success." "Jealous of what exactly?" I asked, tilting my head. "Of my power," Spencer interrupted, practically vibrating with rage. "Of my connections. You think you are so smart because you run some pathetic little public relations agency downtown. You think because you clean up messes for canceled actors and failing brands that you understand how the real world works. I am a vice president at a major hedge fund. I deal with Wall Street titans. I manage portfolios worth more than you will ever see in 10 lifetimes." He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "If you walk out of here without signing those papers, I will make it my personal mission to crush your business. I will make a few phone calls to my corporate buddies. I will ensure every major firm in the city knows your agency is a massive liability. I will dry up your client list by tomorrow morning. You will be bankrupt and begging me for a loan before my honeymoon is even over." My mother chimed in, her voice shrill and panicked. "Listen to him, Riley. He can do it. He has the power to ruin you. Just apologize. Apologize to Jada, sign the deed, and we can forget this ugly little tantrum ever happened. Please do not force your brother to destroy your career." Jada finally spoke, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. "I told you she was going to be a problem, Spencer. She does not belong in our world. She lacks the class to even comprehend what we are trying to build. I cannot believe I wasted my evening sitting across from someone so remarkably selfish." I listened to their threats, their insults, their desperate attempts to force me back into my designated role as the family scapegoat. A few years ago, Spencer's threats might have terrified me. The idea of Wall Street executives coming after my boutique firm might have sent me into a panic. But today, I knew something they did not. I knew exactly what Spencer's financial portfolio really looked like. Instead of arguing, instead of crying or defending my career, I simply reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my smartphone. "What are you doing?" my father demanded. "Put that phone away when I'm talking to you." I unlocked the screen and opened my airline application. I did not look up as I began tapping the screen. "Since I am officially no longer attending this highly curated luxury aesthetic event, my schedule for next week just completely opened up," I announced smoothly. "I have been meaning to take a long vacation." Spencer let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "You are booking a flight. While I am telling you I am going to bankrupt your company, you are playing on your phone." I typed in my destination. Nusa Dua, Bali. I read aloud, narrating my actions for the table. "Departure tomorrow morning. Ticket class first class, one way." I pressed the confirmation button and held the screen up so they could see the bright green checkmark indicating the purchase was complete. I locked the phone and dropped it back into my bag. Jada stared at me, her jaw actually dropping slightly. The idea that someone could effortlessly drop 10 grand on a first-class international ticket on a random Tuesday night completely shattered her narrative that I was a struggling, jealous sister. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with absolute shock. They stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. I had not just refused their demands. I had actively dismissed their threats and planned a luxury tropical vacation right in front of their faces. "You are psychotic," Spencer breathed out, genuinely thrown off balance by my complete lack of fear. I am going to ruin you, Riley. I am not bluffing. I stood up from the table, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I picked up my tailored wool coat from the back of the chair and slipped my arms into the sleeves. I looked down at the four people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. I turned my attention to Jada. She sat rigid, her perfectly contoured face pale with suppressed fury. I offered her a bright, razor-sharp smile. "Good luck financing this lifestyle," I said. I did not wait for a response. I turned on my heel and strode out of the private dining alcove. My heels clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor of the restaurant, a steady, confident beat. I ignored the stares of the other patrons and the nervous glances of the waitstaff. I felt a massive weight lift from my shoulders with every step I took toward the exit. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped out into the crisp, cool air of the New York night, leaving my furious family entirely behind. But just before the door sealed shut, Spencer's desperate, enraged voice echoed out from the dining room, aimed directly at the restaurant manager. "Put the deposit on the card she has on file." 36 hours later, the bitter chill of a New York winter was entirely replaced by the heavy, fragrant humidity of the Indonesian equator. I reclined on a cushioned teakwood sunbed at an ultra-exclusive resort in Nusa Dua, Bali. A pristine infinity pool stretched out directly in front of me, its glassy surface appearing to spill seamlessly into the vibrant turquoise expanse of the Indian Ocean. A warm tropical breeze rustled the massive palm fronds overhead, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and sea salt. It was the absolute picture of a tranquil, undisturbed paradise. But that serene physical environment stood in jarring contrast to the chaotic digital warfare currently erupting on the screen of my smartphone. My phone vibrated violently against the glass side table, shattering the quiet morning peace. The screen lit up, displaying a New York area code and the familiar main office number of the Michelin-starred restaurant I had walked out of a day and a half ago. I set aside my iced coconut water and picked up the device, swiping to accept the call. Before I could even offer a greeting, the strained, deeply uncomfortable voice of the restaurant's general manager rushed through the speaker. His name was Henri, and he had managed my parents' upscale dining reservations for the better part of a decade. "Miss Riley, I am so incredibly sorry to disturb you," Henri said, his voice hushed and hurried, as if he were hiding in a supply closet to make the call. "We have a rather urgent situation at the front desk, and I needed to speak with you directly before proceeding with any transactions." I adjusted my sunglasses, keeping my gaze fixed on the rolling ocean waves. "Tell me what is happening, Henri." "Your brother, Mr. Spencer, is currently standing at the concierge desk with his fiancée and her parents." Henri explained, the anxiety radiating through the phone line. "They are finalizing the event contract for the rehearsal dinner. Mr. Spencer is demanding that we process the $35,000 non-refundable deposit immediately. The issue, Miss Riley, is that he is instructing us to charge the corporate platinum card we have on file under your name, the one you authorized last November for your father's 60th birthday celebration." A cold, sharp laugh escaped my chest. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of my brother was almost impressive. Spencer had actually believed he could simply command a high-end restaurant to run a massive unauthorized charge on my corporate account, assuming I would just absorb the financial hit to save face. He thought my swift exit from the dinner table was a temper tantrum, not a permanent withdrawal of my financial compliance. Henri continued, his tone bordering on panic. "He claims you gave him explicit verbal authorization to use the corporate account as your contribution to the wedding weekend. My accounting director was about to process the transaction, but given the amount and the fact that you are not physically present to sign the receipt, I felt it was my professional duty to call and secure a direct verbal confirmation from you first." "Is this charge authorized, Miss Riley?" I sat up straight on the sunbed, the tropical heat suddenly feeling secondary to the icy focus taking over my mind. "Henri," I said, my voice dropping into the same flat clinical tone I used when negotiating hostile corporate buyouts. "Listen to me very carefully. I did not give my brother verbal authorization to use that card. I did not give him written authorization. I did not agree to fund his rehearsal dinner in any capacity. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. I understand, Miss Riley. I will inform him that the card cannot be used. I am not finished, Henri, I stated firmly, cutting off his polite retreat. You are going to go back out to the front desk, and you are going to physically decline that card. You are going to flag the attempted transaction as unauthorized use. If your accounting department attempts to push that $35,000 charge through on my corporate account, my legal team in Manhattan will immediately file a lawsuit against the restaurant for facilitating credit card fraud and unauthorized corporate theft. Do I make myself absolutely clear? Yes, Miss Riley. Perfectly clear, Henri stammered, completely terrified by the sudden legal threat. We will not process the card under any circumstances. We will inform Mr. Spencer that he must provide an alternate method of payment immediately. Do exactly that, I said. And Henri, have a wonderful evening. I ended the call and instantly opened my secure banking application. My fingers flew across the screen as I accessed the corporate account settings. Within seconds, I locked the platinum card, reported it as compromised, and issued a permanent irrevocable block on any future merchant charges attempting to originate from that specific restaurant group. I watched the status indicator turn from active to disabled, locking my brother out of my assets with definitive digital finality. I set the phone back down on the glass table and picked up my drink. The ice clinked softly against the sides of the glass. I took a slow sip, letting the sweet coconut water cool my throat. I did not need to be in that New York dining room to picture the exact scene unfolding at the concierge desk. I could perfectly envision Spencer standing tall and arrogant in his tailored suit, flashing his perfect smile at Jada's incredibly wealthy, status-obsessed parents. I could see him casually gesturing to the staff to just put it on his sister's account, playing the role of the generous, wealthy groom who had everything handled. And then I pictured Henri walking back out to the front desk, shaking his head, and publicly declining the card right in front of the people Spencer was trying so desperately to impress. The humiliation would be absolute. The facade of his endless wealth would crack right down the middle in full view of his future in-laws. I did not have to wait long for the fallout. Exactly 2 minutes later, my phone screen lit up like a beacon, vibrating so aggressively it nearly slid off the table. The caller ID flashed in bright, angry letters. It was Richard, my father. I calmly swiped the green button to accept the call and brought the phone toward my face. I did not even get the device fully to my ear before a wall of explosive, frantic screaming blasted through the speaker. The sheer volume of my father's rage was so loud and so physically piercing that I immediately had to pull the phone away, holding it at arm's length just to protect my hearing. The restaurant had just publicly declined Spencer's payment right in front of Jada's parents, and the war had officially begun. The sheer volume of my father's rage was a physical force. Even holding the phone a full foot away from my ear, his voice shattered the tranquil Balinese morning. I could practically see the veins bulging in his forehead, the spittle flying from his lips as he paced whatever secluded corner of the Michelin-starred restaurant he had retreated to. "You are a traitor to this family!" Richard bellowed, his breath hitching with raw fury. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You humiliated your brother in front of his future in-laws. You humiliated your mother and me. The manager walked right up to the concierge desk and announced that your card was declined for fraud, in front of Jada's parents. Do you understand the level of embarrassment we are dealing with right now? Your mother is currently in the lobby hyperventilating because of the scene you caused. I watched a small, vibrant blue bird land on the edge of my private infinity pool. I did not speak. I let him rage. You are going to fix this immediately, he commanded, his voice dropping into the lethal, gravelly tone he reserved for insubordinate employees. You are going to open your banking app, and you are going to wire me $35,000 right now to cover this deposit. Then you are going to call your lawyer, sign that 10% deed over to Spencer, and email me the confirmation before the sun sets. If you do not do exactly as I say, you are dead to me, Riley. Do you hear me? You are completely cut off. You will never be welcome in our home again. 10 years ago, that threat would have broken me. At 20, I would have been sobbing, desperate to appease him, desperate to buy back my place in the family hierarchy. But sitting under the equatorial sun, listening to a grown man throw a tantrum because I refused to let his favorite son commit grand larceny against my corporate accounts, I felt absolutely nothing. No tears blurred my vision. No panic tightened my chest. There was only a profound clinical clarity. "Are you finished?" I asked, my voice as placid as the turquoise water stretching out before me. "Do not use that tone with me," Richard snapped, though I could hear the slight hesitation in his breath. He had expected weeping. He had expected capitulation. He did not know how to handle absolute indifference. I shifted my weight on the teakwood sunbed. "Let us walk through the logic of this situation, Dad. Spencer tried to charge $35,000 to a corporate card that does not belong to him. That is called felony fraud. I declined the unauthorized charge to protect my business. Yet you are calling me a traitor. But let us put the legalities aside for a moment and look at the bigger picture." I paused, letting the silence stretch across the international connection. "If Spencer is such a wildly successful vice president," I continued, my tone conversational and mild. "If he is managing Wall Street titans and building a custom Hamptons estate, why is he trying to steal from his sister's public relations firm? If Spencer is a wealthy VP, why can't he pay for his own dinner?" The line went dead quiet. For 3 full seconds, the only sound was the faint rhythmic crashing of the ocean waves against the distant reef. I had asked the one question that defied their entire carefully constructed reality. When Richard finally spoke, the aggressive bluster was gone, replaced by a frantic, scrambling, defensive tone. He began to stammer, tripping over his own words as he searched for a plausible corporate excuse. "You do not understand how high-level finance works, Riley," he sputtered, his voice lacking its usual ironclad certainty. "Spencer is heavily invested right now. It is a matter of liquidity. His capital is completely tied up in aggressive growth funds and international market portfolios. He is restructuring his cash flow for the upcoming quarter to maximize his tax deferments before the wedding. It is a temporary liquidity issue, not a lack of wealth. You would understand that if you ran a real financial institution instead of a boutique firm." I smiled at the pristine blue sky. Liquidity, tied-up investments, cash flow restructuring. It was the exact script of corporate buzzwords men used when they were trying to hide the fact that they were completely broke. Spencer was not restructuring anything. He was drowning, and he had dragged our parents into his delusion. "You are grasping at straws, Dad," I said calmly. "A vice president at a major hedge fund does not bounce a deposit for a dinner. He does not commit credit card fraud against a family member because of a temporary liquidity issue. He does it because his bank accounts are empty." "Shut up!" Richard roared, the panic morphing back into pure, unfiltered rage. "You know nothing about his finances. You are just a bitter, jealous girl trying to tear down a man who has achieved more than you ever will. You are trying to ruin his life because you are miserable in your own. Jada's family is looking at us like we are common criminals, and it is entirely your fault." I reached for my iced coconut water, tracing the condensation on the outside of the glass. "I am not ruining his life," I replied. "I am just refusing to fund his lies." Richard let out a sharp, ragged breath. "You are a disgrace to the family name." He spat, the venom dripping from every syllable. "We are covering the bill for him tonight. Your mother and I are paying the deposit from our personal retirement account so your brother does not have to suffer the humiliation you tried to force on him. We will handle the restaurant. But mark my words, you will pay for this, Riley. You will pay for disrespecting us." The line clicked and went completely silent. He had hung up. I slowly lowered the phone, placing it face down on the glass table next to me. I did not feel a single shred of guilt. I picked up my glass and took a long, refreshing sip of the cool coconut water. The sweet taste washed over my tongue as I leaned back against the plush cushions, letting the tropical sun warm my skin. My father thought he had delivered the ultimate chilling ultimatum. He thought he had put me in my place, securing his golden boy's reputation by writing a massive check he likely could not afford either. He believed his threat would leave me trembling in fear, waiting for the inevitable retaliation he promised. But as I stared out at the endless expanse of the Indian Ocean, a genuine, undeniable smile spread across my face. They had absolutely no idea what I knew. They had no idea that Spencer's hedge fund had quietly terminated his employment 3 months ago. They had no idea that his aggressive growth funds were actually a mountain of highly leveraged, unsecured personal loans. And they certainly had no idea that my blind acquisition company had just purchased the exact portfolio of distressed private debt that held every single one of Spencer's outstanding notes. They thought I was just a public relations manager. They were about to find out I was their sole creditor. I set my empty glass down on the side table and reached into my woven beach tote, pulling out my sleek silver laptop. The metal was warm from the tropical air. I opened the screen, the bright glare of the Balinese morning reflecting off the high-resolution display. Crisis management is fundamentally about leverage. When a high-profile celebrity or a major corporation faces absolute unmitigated ruin, they become desperate. They need capital, they need discretion, and above all, they need a savior. My public relations firm provided the discretion and the strategy. But my other venture, a completely anonymous, limited liability company registered out of a quiet office in Delaware, provided the capital. I did not just spin bad press for a fee, I actively bought toxic assets. When reckless individuals defaulted on massive private loans, the original lenders often sold that debt for pennies on the dollar just to clear their books and walk away. I bought that debt. I restructured it, or when the situation demanded it, I liquidated the assets to the ground. It was a ruthless, highly lucrative, and entirely invisible operation. I placed my thumb on the biometric scanner. A second later, the encrypted portal unlocked. I bypassed the primary folders containing Hollywood actors with severe gambling problems and tech executives attempting to cover up massive embezzlement scandals. Instead, I navigated straight to the private acquisitions folder and clicked directly into a file labeled with my brother's legal name. Spencer's true financial reality populated the screen in stark, unforgiving spreadsheets. It was a masterpiece of absolute catastrophic failure. The Wall Street Titan facade he paraded around our parents was nothing but smoke and mirrors. 3 months ago, Spencer had been quietly terminated from his prestigious hedge fund position for gross negligence and unauthorized trading. To keep up appearances for Jada and her high society parents, he had not reduced his lifestyle by a single cent. Instead, he had turned to high-yield short-term private lenders. These were the kind of lenders who charged exorbitant punishing interest rates and did not accept polite excuses when the invoice came due. The total outstanding balance glowed in an aggressive red font at the top of the dashboard. $2.5 million. He had leveraged absolutely everything to secure that cash, putting up his 90% share of our grandfather's sprawling estate as collateral. But Spencer had a massive, fatal problem. Private lenders are not traditional patient banks. They wanted their money back, and his balloon payment was officially past due. To save himself, Spencer desperately needed to secure a legitimate refinancing loan from a major commercial bank to pay off the private sharks. But no reputable financial institution on the planet would underwrite a multi-million-dollar construction loan on a piece of property with a fractured title. As long as I held my 10%, the land was considered an undivided family estate. It was legally untouchable for commercial development or liquidation. That was the true sinister purpose of the contract at the restaurant. It had absolutely nothing to do with Jada's aesthetic vision or forcing me to fund a $35,000 rehearsal dinner. The dinner demand was just a distraction, a shiny object meant to make me feel small, petty, and obligated to the family hierarchy. The real prize was the deed transfer. If I had signed that piece of paper, Spencer would have gained 100% clean ownership of the property. He would have marched into a bank the very next morning, secured his loan, paid off his massive debts, and built his Hamptons mansion, all while my parents continued to praise his incredible, unmatched business acumen. But he was out of time, and he was completely out of luck, because 3 months ago, when his private lenders realized Spencer was unemployed and financially radioactive, they panicked. They packaged his toxic debt and sold it quietly to a blind acquisition firm willing to take on the risk. My firm. I owned the paper on my golden child brother. Sitting under the swaying palm trees, listening to the gentle lap of the infinity pool against the stone tiles, I scrolled through the ledger. Every designer handbag he had bought Jada to secure her affection, every massive deposit on their extravagant wedding venue, the monthly lease on his imported sports car. It was all funded by my money. My father had just screamed at me through the phone, threatening to cut me off completely blind to the fact that I was the only thing standing between his favorite son and absolute financial ruin. Richard and Patricia had gladly offered to drain their retirement accounts to pay the $35,000 restaurant bill just to save Spencer's pride in front of his in-laws. They were throwing a bucket of water onto a burning skyscraper. I navigated to the final tab in the secure portal. The executive dashboard. A single distinct red button sat at the bottom right corner of the screen. Execute default clause. Pressing that digital button would trigger an immediate automated cascade of catastrophic legal actions. It would instantly freeze Spencer's remaining dwindling bank accounts. It would automatically file a public notice of default across all major credit bureaus, destroying his financial standing permanently. Most importantly, it would initiate the immediate legal seizure of his 90% share of our grandfather's land, transferring the deed directly to my holding company to cover the unpaid debt. I would own the entire estate free and clear. Spencer's carefully curated, pristine life would vaporize in a matter of seconds. Jada's status-obsessed family would see the public bankruptcy filings hit the wire. My parents would finally be forced to look at the absolute failure they had been blindly bankrolling for 34 years. I rested my index finger on the laptop trackpad. I moved the small white cursor across the screen until it hovered perfectly over the bright red button. I took a slow, deep breath of the salt-tinged air, savoring the absolute intoxicating control of this moment. I applied a fraction of an ounce of pressure to the trackpad, fully prepared to click and obliterate my brother's world. Before the mechanism could register the command, my phone erupted on the table beside me. It was not a phone call this time. It was a rapid, unending barrage of electronic chimes. The screen lit up, flashing with a continuous, frantic stream of Instagram notifications. I pulled my finger back from the trackpad, my eyes shifting from the bright red Execute Default Clause button to the violently vibrating phone on the glass table. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of banner notifications. Instagram. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of tags, mentions, and direct messages flooding in at a speed that almost crashed the application's interface. I picked up the device, the tropical sun suddenly feeling intensely hot against my skin. I tapped the Instagram icon. Right at the top of my feed was Jada. She had posted a 3-page video story to her 2 million followers. She was sitting in the back of a black luxury town car, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and delicately dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. I turned up the volume. Jada's voice was a masterclass in manufactured victimhood. She kept it breathy, trembling just enough to sound genuine to an audience of strangers who consumed her highly curated life as absolute reality. "Hey guys," Jada began, her voice cracking with practiced precision. "I usually keep family matters completely private, but I have to speak my truth today. Spencer and I just had the most traumatic experience at our rehearsal dinner tasting. His sister Riley, who has always been incredibly jealous of our relationship and our success, completely sabotaged the evening. She actually tried to illegally access our wedding funds and steal $35,000 from us right there in the restaurant. When we caught her, she screamed at my parents and stormed out." The next slide was a long block of white text against a stark black background. It detailed how toxic family members need to be cut off permanently, and how she was absolutely heartbroken that Spencer's own blood would try to financially ruin their special day out of pure bitter spite. She ended it with a quote about protecting your peace from jealous abusers. Below the video, on a permanent grid post echoing the exact same lies, was the top pinned comment. It was from Spencer. "I am so sorry you had to experience this, babe. I have tried for years to help my sister and support her failing business, but her jealousy is just out of control. We are cutting this toxic energy out of our lives forever. His comment already had 40,000 likes and thousands of replies praising him for being a protective partner. The comments section was an absolute bloodbath. Jada's followers were a highly mobilized army of parasocial defenders, and they were out for blood. They were tagging my personal account, calling me a thief, a sociopath, and a jealous failure. But they did not stop at personal insults. Jada had very conveniently tagged the official Instagram handle of my crisis management firm in a tiny, almost invisible white font in the corner of her video. My email notifications began to chime in rapid unison with the social media alerts. I swiped over to my firm's management dashboard. The digital mob had found us. They were swarming our Google business page, our Yelp profile, and our corporate website. Hundreds of one-star reviews were pouring in by the minute, tanking our perfect rating. The owner is a thief and a scam artist. Do not trust this company with your brand. The CEO steals from her own family. Riley Wilson is a criminal. My meticulously built reputation, the highly respected agency I had bled for over the last 10 years, was being actively carpet-bombed by teenagers and bored internet trolls defending an influencer's entirely fabricated reality. In my line of work, discretion and trust were the only currency that mattered. A sudden flood of fraud accusations could destroy a firm overnight. A sharp, piercing ringtone cut through the rapid-fire notifications. It was an incoming call from Maya, my lead account director back in New York. I swiped to answer, putting the phone on speaker, while keeping my eyes fixed on the laptop screen where Spencer's $2.5 million debt still sat waiting for my command. "Riley, are you seeing this?" Maya asked. Her voice was pitched high with absolute unadulterated panic. I could hear the frantic clicking of keyboards and the ringing of desk phones in the background of our Manhattan office. "We are getting slammed. The main server is practically crashing from the traffic. Jada's followers are review bombing every single platform we have. 2 of our mid-tier clients just emailed asking for an emergency meeting because their names are showing up in the search algorithm next to the word thief. What do we do? Should we issue a denial statement? Should we lock down all the social accounts, Riley? This is a total disaster." I did not panic. I did not feel a single drop of fear. Instead, I felt a cold, sharp rush of absolute adrenaline. Up until this exact second, my plan had only been financial. I was going to seize Spencer's land, bankrupt him quietly, and let him explain his empty bank accounts to his pristine future in-laws behind closed doors. But Jada and Spencer had just changed the rules of engagement. By taking this public, by weaponizing an audience of 2 million people to defame my business and actively attempt to destroy my professional reputation, they had inadvertently handed me the ultimate weapon. They had just committed documented, highly visible, and financially damaging corporate defamation. They thought they were destroying a small, helpless public relations agency. They were too arrogant to realize they had just picked a fight with a crisis management expert. I built strategies to annihilate digital mobs for a living. I destroyed hostile media campaigns before breakfast. And now they had given me the legal justification to not just take their money, but to take their entire public identity and strip it down to the studs. I leaned back against the plush cushions of the sunbed, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. The tropical heat felt absolutely electric against my skin. I looked at the red button on my laptop screen. It was no longer just about executing a debt default. It was about absolute scorched earth retaliation. "Maya, take a breath," I said, my voice completely smooth, calm, and devoid of any anxiety. "Do not lock the accounts. Do not issue a statement. Let them keep commenting. Let them keep posting one-star reviews. I want you to document every single post screenshot, every video story, and archive every comment Spencer makes, validating her claims. Download the analytics showing the direct traffic spike from her profile to our business page." "But Riley, the brand damage," Maya protested, her voice trembling with confusion. "They are destroying us." "No, Maya." I corrected, my smile sharpening into something exceedingly dangerous. "Don't panic. They just handed me the legal grounds to destroy them publicly. Get the legal team on a secure line. Less than 2 minutes later, the highly encrypted video conferencing software on my laptop chimed. The screen split into a grid of 5 distinct feeds. I adjusted my sunglasses and sat forward on the teakwood sunbed, the gentle rustle of palm fronds, and the distant crash of the ocean fading into the background as my digital war room convened. Maya sat in the center square, her face pale, the frantic buzzing energy of our Manhattan office swirling visibly behind her. To her left was Evelyn Vance, my lead corporate litigator, sitting in her pristine glass-walled office overlooking Wall Street. David, our senior crisis analyst, and Sarah, the head of digital forensics, occupied the remaining squares. They all looked incredibly tense, their eyes darting between their own monitors and my feed. I was the only one smiling. "Status report," I demanded, my voice cutting cleanly through the cross chatter. Sarah spoke first, her fingers flying across her keyboard in a blur of motion. "It is escalating faster than a standard celebrity scandal," she reported, sharing her screen to the central feed. "Jada's original video just crossed 4 million views, and her engagement rate is skyrocketing." But that is not the worst part. Spencer just uploaded a carousel of supposedly leaked financial documents to his own grid to back up her story. I narrowed my eyes at the screen, studying the high-resolution images Sarah pulled up. Spencer had actually fabricated wire transfer receipts. He had mocked up fake banking statements using our firm's official letterhead, showing my public relations agency allegedly funneling money out of a private account labeled Wedding Trust. It was a masterpiece of absolute desperation. He had even forged my digital signature at the bottom of the authorization forms. "He is claiming you embezzled their venue deposits to cover up failing margins at your agency," David added, reading the caption aloud, his voice tight with anxiety. "He is calling for a mass boycott of your firm. We are bleeding clients, Riley. We need to put out a holding statement immediately, something neutral and compassionate. We deny the allegations, express deep family sorrow over the misunderstanding, and beg the public for privacy while we resolve this internal dispute." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The sound startled a small bird out of the nearby foliage. "Absolutely not," I said, my tone freezing the panic in the virtual room. "We are not begging for privacy, David. We are not issuing a weak, watered-down apology, and we are certainly not putting out a neutral holding statement. We do not retreat." Evelyn leaned into her webcam, her sharp eyes studying my face with predatory understanding. "Riley, he is crossing into actionable libel. These fabricated screenshots show a clear, documented intent to cause immediate financial harm to your business. We can draft a standard, cease and desist, serve it to his legal representation within the hour, and threaten a massive defamation suit if he does not retract the posts and issue a public apology by tomorrow morning." "A standard cease and desist is a warning shot, Evelyn," I replied, tracing the condensation on my glass of coconut water. "I do not fire warning shots. I want to aim directly for the jugular." Spencer and Jada want to use their digital megaphone to paint a picture of endless wealth, pristine success, and tragic victimhood. We are going to dismantle that picture frame by frame. I minimized the video feed and pulled up the Blind LLC portal containing Spencer's distressed debt portfolio. "Maya, I want you to clear my calendar for the next 48 hours. Sarah, stop tracking the negative reviews and start pulling the public records for the Tribeca penthouse Spencer and Jada supposedly own. They rent it, Riley." Sarah said, her brow furrowing in confusion. "It is public record." "Exactly," I said smoothly. "And as of yesterday, they are 90 days in arrears on a $30,000 monthly lease. The eviction notice has already been drafted by the building's management group." The digital room went dead silent. The frantic clicking of keyboards stopped entirely. "Evelyn," I continued, my voice dropping into a register of cold, absolute authority, "you are going to draft that cease and desist. You are going to make it the most aggressive, legally terrifying document you have ever authored in your entire career. You will cite defamation, tortious interference with a business contract, and the malicious fabrication of financial documents. But you are not going to serve it alone. You are going to attach a highly specific appendix. We are going to call it the Black File." "What is in the Black File?" Evelyn asked, her legal instincts rapidly catching up to my strategy. "Everything," I said softly. I want a comprehensive, undeniable dossier of their actual financial reality. Start with the engagement ring. That 5-carat flawless diamond Jada constantly flashes on her feed to her 2 million followers. It is leased through a private luxury jeweler in the Diamond District, and the latest payment bounced 2 weeks ago. Put the default notice in the file. I scrolled further down the encrypted ledger on my screen, reading the data aloud. Add the cars. Spencer's custom matte black Porsche and Jada's imported luxury SUV are not paid off. The holding company I own holds the notes. The repossession orders are active and currently sitting on my desk. Put them in the file. Add the suspension notices from their exclusive country club. Add the unpaid invoices from their wedding planner. Riley, this is brutal, Maya whispered, though a small, sharp smile was finally breaking through her previous panic. It is factual, I corrected her. They wanted to publicly accuse me of stealing to cover their own insolvency. I am simply providing the receipts they failed to produce. Evelyn, I want the full accounting of Spencer's $2.5 million distressed debt portfolio, laid out in black and white. I want the names of the loan sharks he borrowed from. I want the exact punishing interest rates. And I want the undeniable proof that he used my corporate credit card at the restaurant because all of his own personal accounts were completely frozen by his creditors. The team was moving now. The chaotic panic entirely replaced by the cold, calculated efficiency of a firm that destroyed reputations for a living. Keyboards clattered like gunfire as Sarah began pulling the public default records matching them to the private debt ledgers I was transferring to Evelyn's secure server. Do we leak this to the press? David asked his crisis manager brain, seeing the absolute goldmine of scandal we were compiling. The media would eat this alive. Not yet, I instructed. We give them a chance to look down the barrel of the gun first. Evelyn, when the black file is compiled, you are going to serve it directly to Spencer's personal email, Jada's management team, and you are going to blind copy Richard and Patricia. I want my parents to see the exact itemized list of their Golden Boys failures. I want them to see the eviction notices, the repossession orders, and the astronomical debt they blindly defended. I watched the progress bars on my screen as the heavily encrypted files transferred to the New York office. This was not just a legal defense, it was a complete psychological dismantling. Spencer had spent his entire life protected by a shield of familial favoritism and loud, aggressive bluffing. He had married a woman who traded in the exact same currency of fake superficial perfection. Now they were going to choke on it. The file is fully compiled and ready for your final review, Riley, Evelyn stated a few moments later, her eyes scanning the devastating document she had just assembled. It is completely bulletproof. The moment they open this, they will know you have them cornered. Send it, I instructed, my voice completely devoid of hesitation. But Evelyn, do not just send it to their personal inboxes. Hit them where the actual revenue lives. Evelyn nodded, her fingers already dancing across her keyboard. I am routing the cease and desist directly to the senior partners at Apex Talent Group, Jada's primary management agency. I am also blind copying the corporate legal departments of her 3 biggest current sponsors, the luxury skincare brand, the athletic wear company, and the organic meal delivery service. Give them a strict 60-minute deadline, I said, leaning closer to the screen. Outline the demands clearly. They will delete the 3-page Instagram story. They will scrub the permanent grid post. They will issue a public retraction stating that their previous claims regarding my business were entirely false and driven by a personal misunderstanding. If they fail to comply within exactly 1 hour, the black file gets legally entered into the public record as Exhibit A in a multi-million-dollar tortious interference lawsuit. And court filings are matters of public record. Evelyn finished for me, a sharp edge of triumph in her tone. Page 6 and TMZ monitor those dockets daily. The moment we file, every media outlet in the country will have legal access to the repossession orders, the bounced checks, and the eviction notices. Her entire luxury influencer brand will be exposed as a highly leveraged fraud. Executed, I said. The digital room fell into a focused, vibrating silence as Evelyn hit send. The trap was officially sprung. We were no longer fighting a messy family dispute over a restaurant bill. We were executing a corporate strike on a brand that relied entirely on the illusion of boundless wealth. If Jada's sponsors saw the black file, they would instantly terminate her contracts under their standard morality and fraud clauses. She would lose her primary source of income overnight. I muted my microphone and sat back watching the second hand on my laptop clock sweep forward. The contrast between my physical environment and the digital slaughter I was orchestrating was almost surreal. The Balinese air was heavy with the scent of blooming frangipani. A gentle warm breeze drifted off the Indian Ocean, rustling the sheer white curtains of my private cabana. It was absolute paradise. Yet my eyes remained locked on Sarah's shared screen, watching the live social media analytics, tracking Jada's profile. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. The hate comments on my firm's website were still trickling in, fueled by Jada's outrage machine. "They are reading it right now," Sarah murmured, breaking the silence. "I can see the pingbacks on the email read receipt software. Apex Talent Group just opened the file. Her sponsors just opened it." I took a slow sip of my coconut water. I could perfectly visualize the sheer, unadulterated panic erupting in a high-rise management office in Los Angeles. Talent agents and crisis publicists screaming into their phones, frantically reviewing the attached black file, realizing their star client was not a wealthy socialite, but a financial liability drowning in millions of dollars of high-interest debt. At the 20-minute mark, the traffic to my firm's page began to stall. At 35 minutes, Sarah let out a sharp gasp. "The grid post is gone." I watched the screen as the live feed refreshed. The photo of Jada and Spencer, the one with 40,000 likes and the caption accusing me of theft, completely vanished into the digital ether. 42 minutes, Sarah announced, her voice rising with excitement. "The Instagram stories are coming down. 1, 2, 3. They are all gone. She is scrubbing her entire feed of anything mentioning you or the restaurant." Before the 60-minute deadline could even arrive, Maya's square lit up on the video grid. She was staring at her inbox, her mouth slightly open. "Riley," Maya said, her voice breathless with disbelief. "We just received an official response from the senior legal counsel at Apex Talent Group." "Read it," I commanded. Maya cleared her throat, scanning the text. "Subject: immediate compliance and request for discretion. It says, to the legal representation of Ms. Riley Wilson, we have immediately complied with all demands outlined in your cease and desist. All post stories and mentions regarding your client have been permanently deleted across all platforms." Maya looked up at the camera, a massive grin breaking across her face. "It gets better. They are throwing Spencer directly under the bus." The email goes on to state, "Our client Jada was acting under extreme emotional distress and was entirely misled by her fiancé regarding the true nature of his financial standing and the events at the restaurant. She had no prior knowledge of the debts detailed in your appendix. We humbly request that the attached financial documents remain sealed to protect our client's brand during this difficult personal transition." I smiled. The alliance between Spencer and his bride-to-be had lasted exactly 45 minutes under the threat of public ruin. The moment her sponsorships were threatened, Jada's management team had instantly turned on him, painting her as a naive victim of his financial lies. The facade of their perfect wealthy relationship was utterly demolished. "Stand down the war room," I told my team, closing the blind LLC portal. "We have what we need. Ensure they post the public retraction by noon. Have a good evening, everyone." I ended the video call and snapped the laptop shut. The sudden silence of the villa was deafening. I closed my eyes, letting the tension finally drain from my shoulders. The counterstrike was flawless. Then my phone began to vibrate violently against the glass table. I opened my eyes and looked at the screen. The caller ID flashed in bright letters. Spencer. He was calling. Then he called again. And again. The screen lit up with missed call notifications, stacking one on top of the other. 3 missed calls, 7 missed calls, 14 missed calls. He must have just received the blind copied email from Evelyn. He must have just realized that his sister, the woman he had tried to publicly humiliate and steal from, was the exact same anonymous entity holding the note on his $2.5 million debt. He was trapped and he was terrified. I reached out and pressed the physical button on the side of the device, silencing the frantic buzzing. I had no intention of speaking to him. Let him sit in the agonizing fear of his impending bankruptcy. Let him try to explain to Jada why her management team was treating him like radioactive waste. I picked up my book and prepared to finally enjoy my vacation. But a moment later, the screen lit up again with a completely different ringtone. I glanced over, expecting to see my father's name, ready to unleash another wave of screaming threats. Instead, the caller ID made me freeze. Uncle David, my father's older brother, the quiet, observant black sheep of the family who had moved to the Pacific Northwest decades ago, the only relative who had never participated in the worship of Spencer, and the only person who had ever treated me with genuine, unconditional decency. He had not called me in over a year. I picked up the phone and swiped to answer. Uncle David. I answered, keeping my tone perfectly neutral despite the residual adrenaline coursing through my veins. It has been a long time. Riley, thank God you picked up, he said. His voice was completely wrong. My uncle was a man known for his booming, jovial presence, but right now, he was speaking in a strained, hushed whisper. I could hear a faint echo in the background, making it obvious he had locked himself inside a bathroom to make this call. I need to talk to you before things go completely off the rails over here. I just got off the phone with your father. I leaned back against the cabana cushions, my eyes scanning the tranquil Balinese horizon. If he is calling to complain about the restaurant bill or the social media posts, you can tell him to check Jada's feed, I replied smoothly. The public relations aspect of this dispute has already been handled. No, Riley, please listen to me. David interrupted, his breath hitching with genuine, unadulterated panic. This is not about some internet drama or a canceled dinner check. This is about the house. It is about Richard and Patricia's entire financial foundation. They have done something incredibly foolish, and I am the only one who knows. My posture straightened instantly. The cold, analytical part of my brain locked onto his words. What did they do, David? Your father called me an hour ago begging for a massive short-term cash transfer. David explained, his voice dropping an octave lower. He was practically sobbing. He needed me to wire him $50,000 to cover an emergency bridge loan payment. When I refused and demanded to know why a retired executive with a fully paid-off estate needed that kind of liquid cash, he finally broke down and confessed. Riley, they mortgaged the retirement house. They secretly took out a massive second mortgage on the Connecticut property. I sat frozen, the tropical heat suddenly feeling entirely irrelevant. My parents owned a spectacular, sprawling colonial estate. It was their pride and joy, the ultimate symbol of their lifelong financial conservatism, and it had been paid off for nearly a decade. Why would they leverage their only major asset, I asked, though a dark, sinking suspicion was already forming in my gut. To cover Spencer, David said, spitting the name out with a heavy dose of disgust. The wedding costs spiraled completely out of control. It was not just the rehearsal dinner you refused to pay for. Spencer had vendors threatening to walk out all week. Florists, caterers, the venue management. They all demanded their final deposits in cash, and Spencer's accounts were completely dry. He went to your parents and convinced them that canceling the wedding would destroy his reputation and permanently ruin his future business prospects. He begged them to take out the equity loan to save his face in front of Jada's high society family. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers against my temples. The sheer magnitude of their stupidity was breathtaking. They handed over the equity of their 30-year retirement plan to fund a single weekend of superficial luxury. But my parents were not purely altruistic. They were ruthlessly pragmatic. They would never risk their own comfort without a guaranteed safety net. What was the collateral I demanded? What did Spencer promise them in return for risking their home? David let out a dry, humorless laugh. He sold them a ghost story, Riley. Spencer swore to them that this was merely a temporary liquidity issue. He convinced Richard and Patricia that immediately following the wedding, He was signing a massive commercial real estate venture with Jada's father. He claimed her father was a silent billionaire looking for a domestic partner to manage a multi-million-dollar property portfolio. Spencer promised your parents a 300% return on their mortgage investment within 6 months of the marriage. He told them they would be able to pay off the house and buy a vacation home in the Hamptons with the profits. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. It was a twin grift. It was the most beautifully tragic, entirely pathetic collision of two massive frauds I had ever witnessed. Spencer had convinced my parents that Jada's family possessed infinite wealth, leveraging their awe of her influencer lifestyle to extract hundreds of thousands of dollars in real cash. But I knew exactly what was inside the black file. I knew the truth about Jada's leased diamonds, her rented penthouse, and her aggressively leveraged existence. Jada's father was not a silent billionaire. He was likely just another middle-class man drowning in credit card debt, desperately hoping his daughter married a wealthy finance bro to bail them all out. Spencer thought he was marrying into money. Jada thought she was marrying into money. And my parents had literally bet their absolute survival, their home and their future, on a business deal with a man who probably did not have 2 dimes to rub together. It was a house of cards built on top of a sinkhole. "Riley, are you still there?" David whispered, his panic bleeding through the receiver. "You have to step in. I know they have been terrible to you. I know Spencer is a disaster. But if this wedding happens and that phantom business deal falls through, the bank is going to foreclose on their home. Your mother and father will be completely destitute. They will be living on the street. You have the capital. You have the connections. You have to save them from this." For one fleeting, quiet second, a sharp pang of pity struck my chest. I pictured my mother tending to her immaculate rose bushes in the Connecticut backyard. I pictured my father sitting in his mahogany study proudly reviewing his retirement accounts. They were arrogant, deeply flawed people who had spent my entire life casting me aside in favor of a son who was currently destroying them. They were about to lose everything they had spent 40 years building, all because they were too blinded by favoritism to see a con artist standing right in front of them. But the pity did not last. It evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard resolve. I thought about the restaurant. I thought about my father demanding I hand over my own hard-earned money to subsidize Spencer's delusions. I thought about my mother standing by and watching them attempt to steal $35,000 from me without a single word of protest. They had been perfectly willing to sacrifice my business and my livelihood to protect their golden boy. They had made their bed, poured the gasoline, and handed Spencer the match. "David," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, "I am not stepping in. I am not saving them." "But Riley, they will lose the house," David pleaded. "They made their choice," I replied, staring at the bright red button still waiting on my laptop screen. "They chose to fund a fraud, and they chose to treat me like collateral damage. I will not stop the consequences from arriving. In fact, I am going to accelerate them. Tell my parents I said congratulations on the upcoming nuptials. Now I have a wedding gift to send." I ended the call with Uncle David setting the phone face down on the glass table with a sharp, decisive click. The tropical breeze suddenly felt cooler, the air in the cabana razor sharp. I opened my laptop and instantly re-established the secure video connection to the Manhattan office. Evelyn and Maya appeared on the screen almost simultaneously, their expressions shifting from residual triumph over the digital strike to immediate professional alertness as they registered the look on my face. "Evelyn," I said, my voice completely stripped of any lingering familial hesitation. "We are moving to phase 2. The digital containment was just the perimeter defense. Now we are going to deliver the payload. I need you to source a physical presentation box." Evelyn raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "A physical box?" "Yes," I confirmed, leaning closer to the camera. "I want it to be solid mahogany, the kind of high-end velvet-lined humidor you would use to present a vintage Rolex or the keys to a luxury sports car. I want brass hinges and a custom brass nameplate on the top engraved with Spencer and Jada's names. Spare absolutely no expense." Maya began furiously typing notes. "What are we putting inside it, Riley?" "We are printing the black file." I instructed, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. But we are not printing it on standard printer paper. I want the eviction notices, the repossession orders, the defaulted loan ledgers, and the proof of his fabricated wire transfers printed on heavy premium cardstock. Use the firm's official watermarked parchment. I want the reality of their absolute financial ruin to feel incredibly expensive when they hold it in their hands. Evelyn nodded slowly, her legal mind processing the tactical shift from digital threat to physical confrontation. A beautifully packaged bomb. But how do we deliver it? If you send a package directly to the venue under your name, Spencer will intercept it immediately. He is paranoid, and after today's legal strike, he will be screening every single delivery that comes through those doors. I will not be sending it to Spencer, I said, opening a new tab on my browser and pulling up the couple's lavish, publicly searchable wedding website. I am going to use a Trojan horse. I navigated past the engagement photos shot in Lake Como and the ridiculous fabricated story of how they met, clicking directly onto the wedding party tab. I scrolled past Jada's 6 bridesmaids until I found the groomsmen. There, standing front and center in a painfully tailored tuxedo, was the key to my entire delivery mechanism. Greg Tripp Masterson, I read aloud. Spencer's best man. I quickly ran a background search on Tripp across all major social media platforms. His digital footprint was a masterclass in aggressive, unfiltered vanity. His feeds were a chaotic collage of him popping oversized bottles of champagne at crowded nightclubs, standing on rented yachts, and desperately clamoring for the center of attention in every single photograph. He was the classic peaked-in-college fraternity brother who equated loud public spectacles with genuine personal success. He is perfect, I murmured, tapping the screen. He is deeply insecure, highly performative, and entirely driven by his own ego. He wants to be the star of this wedding just as much as the bride does. Maya, I said, shifting my gaze back to the video grid. You are going to call Mr. Masterson. You are going to use your most polished, exclusive corporate concierge voice. You will tell him that you represent me, and that I am completely devastated by the recent family misunderstandings. You will explain that I am unable to attend the wedding due to the tension, but that I have commissioned a breathtakingly expensive, highly confidential peace offering for my brother and his new wife. Maya's eyes widened as she caught on to the strategy. I am going to tell him you want him to be the one to present it. Exactly, I confirmed. You will tell him that because I cannot be there, I need a trusted, honorable proxy to deliver this massive surprise. You will stroke his ego until he physically cannot resist. Tell him the box contains something that will absolutely define their financial future. Tell him I want him to bring the mahogany box up to the podium during his best man toast. He gets to be the hero. He gets to be the man who delivers the emotional climax of the entire evening. He gets a captive audience of 300 high society guests watching him facilitate a beautiful family reconciliation. He will never open it beforehand to check what it is, Evelyn asked, assessing the risk. Not if Maya emphasizes the extreme confidentiality and the sheer monetary value of the gift, I replied. We will seal the box with a custom wax stamp. Tell him breaking the seal before the toast will ruin the structural integrity of the presentation. A guy like Tripp respects the aesthetic of wealth more than he respects actual logic. He will guard that box with his life just so he can have his moment in the spotlight. Maya was already pulling up her script writing software. I have his contact information from the venue directory. I am making the call right now. I kept the video feed open, watching in silence as Maya dialed the number, her professional demeanor locking into place. I listened as she executed the script with terrifying precision. She pitched her voice perfectly, blending high-end exclusivity with a touch of manufactured emotional weight. I heard her validate Tripp's importance, confirming his status as Spencer's most trusted confidant. I watched the triumphant smirk spread across Maya's face as the man on the other end of the line eagerly swallowed every single hook, line, and sinker. Within 10 minutes, the call was over. Maya disconnected the line and looked up at the camera, her eyes gleaming. He took it. Maya reported, breathless with adrenaline. He practically begged to be the one to do it. He promised he would keep the box locked in the bridal suite safe until the exact moment of his speech. He said he has a special spotlight queued up for his toast, and that this will be the greatest wedding surprise in history. I nodded, the cold satisfaction settling deep into my bones. Evelyn finalized the printing. I want the documents bound in black leather inside that mahogany box. Include a printed copy of the email his management team sent, throwing him under the bus. Include the foreclosure notice for my parents' home. Let Spencer open that box in front of 300 guests, in front of his wealthy new in-laws, and in front of the bride who is already preparing to legally sever herself from his toxic brand. It is being assembled as we speak, Evelyn confirmed, holding up her phone to show a secure message from her administrative team. The box is engraved. The documents are printed on watermarked cardstock. We are sealing it with a gold wax crest. Ship it, I commanded. Do not use standard mail. Hire a private bonded courier service. I want that package hand-delivered directly to Trip Masterson at the venue tomorrow afternoon. Ensure the courier requires a direct signature and a photograph of the handover. Consider it done. Evelyn said, her fingers flying across her screen to finalize the logistics. The courier is booked. The package will be in transit within the hour. I closed the connection and shut the laptop, leaving it on the table. The sun was beginning to set over the Bali coastline, casting long, bleeding streaks of orange and purple across the darkening water. The humid air felt suddenly electric, charged with the inescapable gravity of what was about to happen. Spencer had spent his entire life building a fictional empire fueled by arrogance, entitlement, and my family's endless financial sacrifices. He had tried to use me as the final stepping stone to secure his grand illusion. Now his best friend was holding the detonator, eager to press the button in front of a live audience. The package was sealed. The courier was dispatched. The trap was officially set. 72 hours later, the trap prepared to spring. I sat at a shaded circular table at a beachfront bar in Nusa Dua, the warm Indian Ocean lapping gently at the pristine white sand just a few yards away. A freshly poured mimosa sat sweating slightly in the tropical heat next to my propped open iPad Pro. I adjusted my posture against the woven rattan chair, tapping the screen to maximize the live video player. Jada, ever the relentless opportunist, had refused to let her matrimonial debut go unmonetized. She had brokered a highly lucrative, exclusive streaming deal with a premier bridal magazine. The entire event was being broadcast live in pristine high definition to her millions of followers and anyone willing to log into the magazine's digital portal. From a crisis management perspective, it was a tactical error of catastrophic proportions. By inviting the entire internet into her private sanctuary and selling the broadcast rights, she had stripped away any possibility of containing the impending fallout. The cameras were everywhere, mounted on jibs and sweeping across the manicured lawns, capturing every hyper-curated detail of the afternoon. The venue was a sprawling historic coastal mansion in the Hamptons, a property that screamed old money and exclusivity. The visual extravagance was frankly obscene, designed to overwhelm the senses. Massive cascading arches of white orchids and imported peonies adorned every doorway and framed the altar. A 12-piece string quartet played softly on a stone terrace overlooking the Atlantic. Waitstaff in crisp white linen jackets circulated through the crowd with silver trays of beluga caviar and vintage champagne. It was a masterclass in projecting boundless wealth, a beautifully constructed stage set meant to elevate Spencer and Jada into the upper echelons of elite society. The camera panned across the front rows of the reception seating, giving me a crystal-clear, high-definition view of the key players. Jada's family sat on the bride's side, looking incredibly regal and deeply intimidating. Her father, the supposed silent billionaire my parents had bet their entire future on, wore a bespoke tuxedo and a stern, unreadable expression. Her mother and extended relatives projected an aura of demanding perfection, a family that clearly did not tolerate failure, financial weakness, or public embarrassment. Across the aisle, sitting in the front row of the groom's side, were my parents. I zoomed in on the feed, studying Richard and Patricia closely. To the casual observer, they looked exactly like the proud, successful parents of a wealthy groom. My mother wore an icy blue designer gown, and my father sported a sharp, custom-tailored black suit. But I knew them better than anyone on earth. I could see the rigid, unnatural tension in my father's shoulders. I could see the slight sheen of sweat on my mother's forehead that had nothing to do with the humid summer heat. They were smiling broadly, enthusiastically clapping as the newlyweds were officially announced, but their eyes held a frantic, desperate energy. They were sitting on top of a massive secret second mortgage, crushed under the suffocating weight of their financial anxiety. They were puffing their chests at their son's perceived triumph, entirely unaware that the very foundation of their retirement was currently locked inside a mahogany box sitting on the head table. The broadcast transitioned smoothly as the sun began to set, bathing the Hamptons estate in a warm, cinematic golden hour glow. The reception shifted into high gear. Thousands of dollars worth of champagne flowed freely into crystal flutes. Spencer and Jada took the floor for their first dance, spinning gracefully beneath a massive canopy of fairy lights and hanging floral arrangements. The live chat rolling alongside the video stream was a rapid-fire blur of adoration, with followers gushing over the fairy tale aesthetic and the flawless, wealthy couple. The illusion was functioning at absolute maximum capacity. Every single element of the evening had been meticulously designed to manufacture intense public envy. I watched as the lavish dinner service concluded, and the waitstaff began rapidly clearing the fine china from the tables. The camera angle shifted again, focusing on the large, elevated stage at the front of the grand reception tent. It was time for the speeches. This was the moment Trip Masterson had been waiting for all day. This was the spotlight he craved with every fiber of his being. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the bar table, my eyes glued to the screen. The best man stepped up to the microphone. He was holding a champagne flute in his right hand, and tucked securely under his left arm was the heavy, brass-hinged mahogany box. My custom gold wax seal gleamed brightly under the stage lights, perfectly intact. He tapped the microphone twice, the sharp, thumping sound echoing through the massive tent and instantly silencing the chatter of the 300 high society guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tripp began, his voice booming with performative charisma, projecting exactly the kind of loud, frat brother confidence my team had anticipated. "If I could have your attention, please. We have had a truly beautiful evening, celebrating Spencer and Jada, two people who clearly have the world in the palm of their hands. But before I give my official toast and raise a glass to the happy couple, I have a very special duty to fulfill tonight." Tripp paused for dramatic effect, letting the heavy silence stretch across the room as he stepped out from behind the podium. He made sure every single professional camera and every single pair of eyes in the tent was locked directly onto him. He held the mahogany box up slightly, displaying the engraved brass nameplate to the crowd. "I am holding a highly confidential, incredibly valuable delivery trip," announced a massive, self-satisfied grin spreading across his face as he looked down at the head table. "Spencer, this just arrived via secure private courier. It is a massive surprise peace offering sent directly from your absent sister, Riley. She wanted me to personally present this to you in front of everyone you love to solidify your financial future and show exactly where she stands." The crowd erupted into a polite, curious murmur. On my iPad screen, the camera operator flawlessly executed a slow pan away from Trip Masterson and pushed in close on the head table. Spencer's face was a portrait of pure, unadulterated triumph. The anxiety that had been tightening his jaw all evening instantly evaporated, replaced by a smug, arrogant grin that stretched from ear to ear. He looked exactly like a man who believed he had just conquered the world, a king finally receiving his rightful tribute from a rebellious subject. He genuinely believed he had won. He believed that my tactical silence over the past 72 hours was a sign of absolute surrender. He assumed my absence from his wedding was born of submission, and that this highly publicized grand gesture was my pathetic way of begging for scraps at his table. The audio-visual production value of Jada's exclusive magazine deal was impeccable. Small, high-fidelity microphones were discreetly woven into the massive floral arrangements, lining the head table, explicitly designed to capture the couple's intimate romantic whispers throughout the dinner service. The audio technicians running the live broadcast must have boosted the levels to catch their reaction to the best man's surprise. Spencer leaned to his left, closing the distance between himself and his radiant new bride. He cupped his hand over his mouth, a gesture of privacy that was entirely negated by the hot microphone resting less than 6 inches from his lapel. "She caved," Spencer whispered. The audio feed piped the words with crystal-clear fidelity directly through my iPad speakers and into the ears of whatever massive audience was currently logged into the live stream. "She sent the 10% deed," he added, a wet, breathy chuckle escaping his throat. Jada's posture shifted immediately. A flash of predatory satisfaction crossed her perfectly contoured features. She reached out, placing her manicured hand over his, the massive leased diamond ring catching the ambient light of the chandeliers. She whispered back, her voice equally amplified by the hidden microphone. "I told you she would break. They always break when you remind them they are nothing without us." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my mimosa, letting the chilled citrus wash over my tongue. The sheer arrogance was intoxicating. They were digging their own graves on a live, internationally broadcast feed, completely unaware that the shovel was already in their hands. The camera feed cut to a wide shot capturing my parents sitting in the front row of the VIP tables. My father let out a long, heavy exhale, his chest visibly deflating as the crushing weight of his secret second mortgage temporarily lifted. He turned to my mother, clapping his hands together with aggressive enthusiasm. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with a silk napkin, beaming with a sickening mixture of maternal pride and immense financial relief. They heard the word deed and instantly constructed a fantasy where I had sacrificed my own livelihood to bail out their golden child. They assumed the mahogany box held the financial salvation they had desperately gambled their retirement home to secure. Trip Masterson stepped off the stage, holding the heavy presentation box in front of him like a sacred relic. The camera operator switched to a smooth tracking shot following the best man as he navigated the narrow pathway between the tables of minor celebrities, fashion influencers, and corporate executives. The lighting design of the tent caught the polished mahogany surface, making the rich wood gleam with undeniable wealth. The custom gold wax seal I had commissioned looked absolutely flawless, projecting an aura of extreme exclusivity. It looked exactly like the kind of vessel that would hold a multi-million-dollar property transfer or a stack of bearer bonds. Tripp reached the head table. He paused, making sure the main camera was perfectly framed over his shoulder before he theatrically placed the heavy box directly onto the white linen tablecloth in front of Spencer and Jada. The dull, solid thud of the wood hitting the table resonated through the hot microphones. The entire ballroom fell dead silent. It was the kind of total suffocating silence that only occurs when hundreds of people are simultaneously gripped by raw curiosity. The 12-piece string quartet had ceased playing on the stone terrace. The clinking of heavy silver forks against fine bone china stopped completely. 300 high society guests held their collective breath, leaning forward in their gilded chairs. I could see the glow of dozens of smartphone screens lighting up the dim corners of the tent as various influencers and guests began recording their own angles of the moment, desperate to capture the exclusive content for their own feeds. The anticipation was a physical entity in the room, thick and heavy. They were all waiting to witness the ultimate display of generational wealth and family loyalty. I sat halfway across the world, thousands of miles away from the manufactured glitz and suffocating anxiety of the Hamptons, completely isolated in a quiet Balinese paradise. The gentle rustle of palm leaves and the distant rhythmic crashing of the ocean waves provided the only soundtrack to my viewing experience. The contrast was beautifully stark. They were trapped in a pressure cooker of their own design, desperate to maintain an illusion of perfection. I was sitting in a sheer cabana, wearing a simple linen dress, holding the strings to a marionette show that was about to violently collapse in on itself. Spencer stood up from his chair. He buttoned his custom tuxedo jacket with an air of profound self-importance, shooting his cuffs to ensure his expensive watch caught the light. He looked out at the sea of guests, flashing a brilliant camera-ready smile, soaking in the absolute silence and the undivided attention of the room. He reached down and rested his fingertips on the polished mahogany lid, letting his hand linger there to build the dramatic tension. He was milking every single second of the spotlight. Jada leaned in close, her eyes wide, staring at the gold wax seal with undisguised greed. She was ready to claim her prize. She was ready to add my hard work, my equity, and my restaurant to her portfolio of heavily leveraged illusions. Spencer's fingers found the end of the thick black silk ribbon binding the box together. He pulled it smoothly, letting the heavy fabric fall away onto the white tablecloth. He hooked his thumb under the heavy brass latch. The sharp metallic click of the locking mechanism snapping open echoed loudly through the hot microphones, a sound like a guillotine dropping into place. He flipped the lid open. I set my mimosa down on the glass table and leaned closer to my iPad screen. Spencer reached into the velvet-lined interior of the mahogany box. His movements were slow, deliberately dramatic, milking the suspense for the hundreds of guests watching him. His manicured fingers grasped the black leather binding that Evelyn had selected. It looked incredibly sophisticated, resembling the presentation portfolio of a high-end investment firm or the menu of a Michelin-starred restaurant. He pulled the thick stack of premium cardstock out of the box and rested it on the white tablecloth directly beneath the glare of the stage lights and the unblinking lens of the primary broadcast camera. He flipped open the black leather cover. I watched the live feed in high definition, the resolution so incredibly crisp that I could see the exact microsecond his reality shattered. The arrogant, triumphant grin did not simply fade from Spencer's face. It snapped. It vanished instantly, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The artificial tan seemed to drain directly out of his skin, leaving him a sickly pallid gray against the stark white collar of his custom tuxedo. The hot microphone woven into the floral arrangement in front of him picked up a sharp, stuttering intake of breath. It was the sound of a man who had just stepped off a cliff in the dark. The camera operator, sensing the sudden drastic shift in the groom's demeanor and hunting for the ultimate emotional reaction shot, pushed the lens in tighter. The operator smoothly zoomed over Spencer's shoulder, focusing directly on the documents resting in his hands. The HD feed broadcast the image to the entire world with ruthless clarity. The heavy parchment was stamped with glaring, undeniable red ink. The bold, capitalized header dominated the top third of the page, formatted perfectly by my legal team for maximum visual impact. Notice of immediate foreclosure. I smiled, a slow, deep satisfaction settling into my bones as the Balinese breeze washed over me. Below that bold header, the text was equally unforgiving. The document explicitly outlined the absolute legal seizure of his 90% share of our grandfather's land. It detailed the defaulted loans, the breached contracts, and the immediate transfer of assets due to non-payment. It was not a warning. It was not a negotiation tactic. It was the final, irreversible termination of his financial existence laid bare in Times New Roman. The live chat running alongside my video player, which had been a steady stream of heart emojis and wedding congratulations, suddenly stalled. A few confused question marks popped up on the screen. The viewers at home were squinting at their devices, trying to decipher the red stamps and the legal jargon. On the stage, Spencer's physical breakdown began. His hands gripping the edges of the heavy cardstock started to tremble. It began as a slight quiver, a subtle vibration in his fingers, but within seconds it escalated into a violent, uncontrollable shake. The stiff premium paper rattled audibly against the hot microphone, a rapid, percussive sound that echoed through the dead silence of the Hamptons reception tent. He stared at the words, his eyes darting frantically across the page, as if hoping the text would magically rearrange itself into the 10% deed he had promised his bride and his in-laws. He blinked rapidly, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. He looked up from the document, his gaze sweeping blindly over the 300 high society guests. He was not seeing them. He was seeing the total collapse of his meticulously constructed empire. He was seeing the inevitable exposure of his massive, highly leveraged fraud. The heavy, suffocating silence in the tent stretched on for an agonizing 10 seconds. The guests were completely immobilized, unsure of what they were witnessing. Was it a joke? Was it bad news? Was the groom having a medical emergency? The silence was finally broken by a sharp, piercing voice from the front row of the VIP section. "What is it, darling? Show us." It was my mother. Patricia was sitting at the edge of her gilded chair, completely oblivious to the catastrophic panic unfolding on her son's face. She was practically vibrating with a desperate, pathetic need for public validation. She truly believed that the mahogany box contained the final key to their financial salvation. She believed Spencer was holding the document that would justify mortgaging her retirement home and validate every arrogant choice she had ever made. She wanted the entire room of wealthy strangers to see her son's supposed triumph. "Show everyone the gift," Patricia urged, her voice echoing clearly through the cavernous space, completely ignorant of the fact that she was enthusiastically cheering on her own impending destitution. Spencer jerked violently at the sound of his mother's voice. His survival instincts finally kicked in, but they were sloppy and panicked. He fumbled with the heavy cardstock, trying to fold the thick documents in half. He desperately tried to shove the papers back into the black leather binding and jam the entire portfolio back into the velvet-lined interior of the mahogany box. He wanted to slam the brass latch shut. He wanted to throw a blanket over the ticking bomb before it detonated. But Jada was sitting directly beside him. Jada had been primed and conditioned for months to expect a specific outcome. She had been promised wealth. She had been promised the final controlling deed to the commercial property that would complete their influencer empire. She saw her new husband violently trembling. She saw him trying to hide the contents of the highly publicized, incredibly expensive presentation box. She did not interpret his actions as fear. She interpreted them as hesitation. She thought he was being overly dramatic, dragging out the reveal, or perhaps trying to keep the details of their new wealth private from the cameras she had explicitly invited. Her sense of absolute entitlement completely overrode any instinct to read her husband's distress. Jada let out a sharp, irritated sigh, her patience exhausted. She reached over, her movements aggressive and swift, and snatched the thick stack of legal documents right out of Spencer's trembling hands. She pulled the heavy parchment toward her, adjusting her posture to ensure the primary broadcast camera caught her best angle. Her lips were already parted, prepared to form the words of a gracious, tearful acceptance speech. She fully expected to behold the deed to a lucrative commercial property, the final jewel in the crown of her carefully curated high society aesthetic. But the words died in her throat. Her eyes hit the bold red ink. Notice of immediate foreclosure. I watched the live high-definition feed from my cabana in Bali as her brow furrowed in profound, agonizing confusion. The cognitive dissonance was entirely visible on her face. This was not a property transfer. This was an eviction notice. This was a legal declaration of absolute ruin. But she did not stop there. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement that had propelled her to grab the stack now fueled her frantic need for answers. She flipped the first heavy page over the stiff cardstock, snapping loudly against the floral microphone positioned inches from her chest. The second and third documents were the comprehensive financial ledgers. I had explicitly instructed my legal team in New York to format them with ruthless, brutal clarity. There was no dense, impenetrable legal jargon to hide behind. There were only stark, undeniable columns of numbers, dates, and defaulted balances. Jada's eyes darted back and forth across the columns. The camera operator, possessing the ruthless instinct of a reality television veteran, zoomed in just enough for the viewers at home to catch the catastrophic details. It was a full, unredacted ledger of the $2.5 million predatory loan Spencer had taken out to fund his fraudulent existence. She saw the line items. Every single piece of her manufactured luxury was explicitly listed and painfully exposed. The spectacular 5-carat diamond engagement ring, currently sparkling on her left hand, was heavily financed at a staggering 28% interest rate, and the ledger clearly marked it as 3 months in default. The matching Mercedes SUVs they had aggressively flaunted to her millions of Instagram followers were leased under a high-risk corporate account that was hopelessly in arrears. Then her eyes landed on the current wedding expenses. The 6-figure deposit for the Hamptons mansion where they were currently sitting. The exorbitant catering bill. The 12-piece string quartet. The imported white peonies hanging above her head. Every single penny of her fairy tale wedding had been squeezed from a toxic, high-interest bridge loan. Spencer had absolutely zero liquidity. He was a financial ghost. The hot microphone picked up her ragged, shallow breathing. The entire ballroom, filled with 300 elite high society guests, remained trapped in a suffocating dead silence. The clinking of crystal and the soft murmurs of conversation had completely vanished. They were watching a live public execution of a brand, and no one dared to look away. I glanced at the wide shot on my iPad. My parents were sitting at the VIP table, their faces completely drained of color. Just moments ago, Patricia had been eagerly yelling for Spencer to show everyone the gift. Now she was frozen, her hand covering her mouth in dawning horror. My father had half risen from his gilded chair, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the table. He was a retired executive. He knew exactly what a foreclosure ledger looked like. In that agonizing silence, I could practically see him doing the math in his head, realizing that the phantom billionaire father-in-law was not going to provide a rescue package, and that the second mortgage he had secretly taken out on their Connecticut retirement home was tied to a sinking ship. Jada was physically shaking now. Her flawless camera-ready composure completely eroded, replaced by a visceral, furious panic. She aggressively flipped past the ledgers to the final page bound in the black leather portfolio. This was the final payload, the ultimate strike. It was the certificate of ownership. The document established exactly who held the note on the $2.5 million of catastrophic debt. It outlined exactly who had purchased the predatory loan from the original private equity lender, consolidating Spencer's absolute financial ruin into a single, aggressively managed portfolio. Jada stared at the paper, her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She looked at Spencer, who was visibly sweating, shrinking back into his tailored tuxedo jacket like a cornered animal waiting for the slaughter. Then her eyes dropped back down to the heavy cardstock. She did not realize the hot microphone was perfectly positioned to catch her every breath. Or perhaps, in her state of absolute blinding shock, she simply did not care. She read the bold, capitalized text aloud. Her voice trembled, cracking with disbelief as the words echoed through the massive tent, blasting out of the venue speakers and directly across the high-definition live stream to millions of viewers. Creditor and sole owner of debt, Riley, LLC. The collective gasp that ripped through the ballroom was deafening. It was a physical shockwave of realization that visibly rippled through the crowd. 300 guests, Jada's intimidating image-obsessed family, and my deeply arrogant parents all processed the brutal truth simultaneously. I was not just the absent sister. I was not the discarded, ungrateful scapegoat they had tried to manipulate into covering a rehearsal dinner bill. I was the architect of their destruction. I was the executioner. I held the deed to my grandfather's land. I held the note on Spencer's entirely fraudulent lifestyle. And I held the ultimate crushing leverage over the retirement home my parents had foolishly mortgaged to protect him. I owned everything he had. Spencer lunged forward, his chair scraping violently against the polished dance floor. He tried to grab Jada's arm, his eyes wide with desperate, sweaty panic, stammering, "I can explain, baby. It is just a cash flow issue." Jada's eyes locked onto the crisp pages, her manicured nails digging into the heavy cardstock. She did not possess a business degree, but it did not take a financial genius to understand the stark, brutal columns of negative numbers. She saw the multi-million-dollar principal. She saw the staggering interest rates. She saw the overdue notices stamped in aggressive red ink beside the line items for her engagement ring, her leased luxury SUV, and the deposit for the very tent they were sitting inside. Spencer's pathetic, sweaty stammering about cash flow issues sounded like a distant, buzzing insect. The reality of the situation crashed into her with the force of a freight train. Her meticulously curated personal brand, her carefully projected image of entering the upper echelons of elite society, her entire future was legally bound to a bankrupt fraud. Spencer reached out, his hands slick with nervous sweat pawing at her lace sleeve. He tried to pull the documents back, his mouth opening and closing, as he searched for a lie big enough to cover a crater this deep. He pleaded with her to keep her voice down, to smile for the cameras, to just let him fix it. Jada did not let him fix it. Her breathing hitched, her chest heaving as the absolute humiliating betrayal took hold. The illusion of the wealthy, sophisticated groom completely evaporated, leaving only a desperate, broke con artist in a rented tuxedo. In a moment of pure, unadulterated rage, her hand shot out. She grabbed the stem of her crystal flute filled to the brim with vintage champagne. Without a fraction of a second of hesitation, she hurled the contents directly into Spencer's face. The splash was incredibly loud through the hot microphone. The pale golden liquid hit him square in the eyes, instantly soaking his artificially styled hair and dripping down his cheeks. He gasped a pathetic sputtering sound, blindly raising his hands to wipe the stinging alcohol from his eyes. The custom silk lapels of his jacket darkened instantly as the champagne soaked into the expensive fabric. "You are a broke, lying fraud!" Jada screamed. The raw, guttural volume of her voice caused the audio feed to peak and distort, sending a harsh crackle of static through the live stream. She did not stop there. The champagne was not enough. She needed to physically punish the man who had just publicly humiliated her in front of millions. She lunged toward the center of the table and grabbed her massive, cascading bridal bouquet. It was a heavy, dense arrangement of imported white orchids, peonies, and thick green vines bound tightly with wire and silk ribbon. She swung it like a medieval club, smashing it directly into Spencer's chest. The impact sounded like a wet thud over the speakers. White petals and crushed green leaves exploded into the air, raining down over the white linen tablecloth and the foreclosure documents scattered across it. Spencer stumbled backward, his chair tipping perilously as he raised his arms to shield his face from the onslaught of floral destruction. Jada hit him again, screaming incoherently, her perfect bridal veil slipping sideways as she leaned over the table to deliver another crushing blow. The sheer chaos of the scene broke the paralysis gripping the room. The 300 high society guests erupted into a deafening chorus of gasps, shouts, and frantic whispers. Chairs scraped violently against the stone terrace as people scrambled to their feet. In the front row of the bride's side, Jada's father reacted with the cold, ruthless efficiency of a man who handled corporate hostile takeovers before breakfast. He did not shout. He did not display a single ounce of panic. He simply stood up, buttoned his bespoke jacket, and gave a sharp, commanding nod to the perimeter of the tent. Instantly, 4 massive men in dark suits wearing earpieces broke from the shadows. His private security detail surged forward, moving with terrifying speed toward the head table to extract his daughter from the collapsing spectacle. Across the aisle, Richard and Patricia were completely destroyed. They remained absolutely frozen in their seats, pinned down by the gravitational force of their own ruin. Patricia's jaw hung slack, her eyes wide and unblinking, as she watched her golden child cowering behind a spray of crushed orchids, dripping with champagne and public disgrace. The phantom deed was gone. The billionaire bailout was a mirage. Richard clutched the edge of the table, his face a dangerous shade of purple. He was staring at the scattered legal documents on the stage, fully comprehending that Spencer's absolute default meant the immediate forfeiture of the secret second mortgage. They had bet their entire safe suburban existence on Spencer's lie, and they had just lost their home. The digital audience was feeding on the carnage. The live chat rolling alongside the video feed on my iPad was moving so fast it was completely illegible, a frantic blur of shock, mockery, and viral joy. Millions of strangers were screen recording the ultimate destruction of a curated aesthetic. On the stage, the security team reached the head table. 2 large men stepped between the warring couple, physically restraining Jada, who was still trying to launch a heavy silver gravy boat at Spencer's head. Another guard grabbed Spencer by the shoulder of his ruined tuxedo, aggressively hauling him backward away from the screaming bride. The camera operator, caught in the frenzy, tried to track Spencer as he was dragged away, but a security guard's broad back suddenly filled the frame. A large hand reached out, grabbing the camera lens. The feed shook violently, capturing a dizzying, nauseating blur of the tent ceiling, the overturned chairs, and the frantic crowd. Someone yelled for the broadcast to be killed. The high-definition image abruptly cut out, replaced by a stark, silent black screen and a spinning loading circle. The show was officially over. I sat in the warm tropical silence of my cabana, the violent noise of the Hamptons instantly replaced by the soothing, rhythmic crash of the Indian Ocean against the pristine white sand. The contrast was exquisite. I reached out and calmly pressed the power button on my iPad, sending the screen to black and plunging the wreckage of Spencer's life into the digital void. I leaned back against the woven rattan chair, stretching my legs out into a patch of golden afternoon sunlight. I picked up my crystal flute, admiring the condensation sweating down the glass, and took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my mimosa. It tasted incredibly sweet. I turned my head toward the shaded tiki bar just a few yards away. The bartender, a local man with a bright, easy smile, was wiping down the counter. He caught my eye and raised an eyebrow, gesturing silently to my nearly empty glass to see if I wanted another. I smiled back, lifting my glass in a toast to the empty air. Best wedding I have ever attended. 12 hours later, the Balinese sun began its slow, majestic ascent over the horizon, painting the Indian Ocean in brilliant streaks of violet and gold. I sat on the plush cushions of my private terrace, a freshly brewed cup of black coffee warming my hands. The tranquil, rhythmic sound of the morning tide was a stark contrast to the absolute digital war zone actively detonating on the glass table in front of me. My phone had not stopped vibrating, buzzing, and flashing since the live stream abruptly cut to black. The notifications were a relentless cascading waterfall of panic. I had intentionally left the device on silent, allowing the chaos to accumulate overnight, while I slept the deep, dreamless sleep of the truly vindicated. Now scrolling through the lock screen, I tallied the carnage. 87 missed calls, over 200 text messages, 34 voicemails. The names attached to the notifications were exactly who I expected: Spencer, Patricia, Richard. They had spent years treating me like a ghost, an invisible entity only acknowledged when they needed a scapegoat or a punchline. Now I was the absolute center of their universe. I unlocked the phone and tapped into the visual voicemail interface, deciding to tackle Spencer's downward spiral first. The timestamps on his messages painted a vivid picture of a man experiencing the 5 stages of grief in rapid succession. His first voicemail, left merely minutes after the broadcast ended, was pure, unadulterated rage. He was screaming into the receiver, his voice hoarse and cracking with exertion. He demanded I pick up the phone. He threatened to sue me for defamation. He called me every vile, degrading name in his limited vocabulary, insisting that this was just a clerical error and that his lawyers would crush my pathetic little LLC by morning. I deleted it halfway through. It was boring. The subsequent messages, however, were an absolute symphony of despair. As the hours ticked by in New York, the reality of his situation had clearly set in. The arrogance bled out of him, replaced by a raw, suffocating panic. By voicemail number 8, the threats had completely vanished. "Riley, pick up the phone, please." His voice trembled, the sound of heavy, ragged breathing filling the brief pauses. "You have to stop this right now." Jada walked out. She literally packed her bags and walked out of the bridal suite. "She says the marriage is a fraud." "Riley, you can't do this." Jada left me at the altar. "Her family is suing me for the wedding costs. They are freezing my accounts. Please call off the foreclosure. I will do anything. Just pick up." He was openly sobbing by the end of the recording. The golden boy, the untouchable prince of the family, reduced to begging his discarded sister for mercy. He was finally experiencing the consequences of his actions, completely stripped of his safety nets and his illusions. The predatory loan had clamped its jaws shut. The high society in-laws he had so desperately tried to impress were currently deploying their own massive legal team to tear him to shreds. He had wanted to play in the big leagues, and now he was being dismantled by them. I calmly swiped to the next batch of audio files. These were from my mother. Patricia's messages lacked Spencer's initial rage. She went straight into a state of sheer hysterical terror. For 30 years, her entire identity had been wrapped up in projecting an image of flawless upper-class superiority. She had happily ignored my pain, dismissed my hard work, and funded my brother's reckless ego because it fed her own desperate need for status. She had sat in the front row of that wedding reception wearing a designer gown, eagerly waiting for my public humiliation. Now the bill had arrived, and she did not have the funds to cover it. Her final voicemail, left at 3 in the morning Eastern Standard Time, was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation and sheer panic. "Riley, please." Her voice was a high, wailing shriek, the polished country club accent completely destroyed. "You have to answer me. We do not understand what is happening. The bank just called your father. Riley. Please. We mortgaged our house for him. If you take his assets, we lose our home too. You're destroying your own blood. You have to stop this. You are ruining the family." I listened to the message twice, my expression entirely neutral. She was not crying because she had betrayed me. She was not begging for forgiveness for participating in a scheme to steal my hard-earned equity. She was crying because the comfortable, wealthy reality she had built on my back was currently burning to the ground. She was terrified of losing her house, her social standing, and her perfect life. Her use of the phrase "own blood" was particularly ironic. Family loyalty was a concept they only weaponized when it suited their needs. When I was struggling, when I was building a business from nothing, I was not blood. I was an inconvenience. Now that I held the executioner's axe, I was suddenly family again. I deleted the voicemail and set the phone back down on the glass table. The coffee was still warm. I took a slow sip, letting the rich, bitter flavor settle on my tongue. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. They had willingly co-signed a predatory loan to steal my restaurant and strip me of my rightful inheritance. They had handed Spencer the matches, and now they were furious that the fire had reached their own front porch. As I watched a small fishing boat cut across the shimmering ocean, the screen of my phone suddenly lit up again. The device vibrated violently against the glass tabletop, disrupting the peaceful morning silence. Incoming call, Richard. My father had been the quietest participant in this entire saga. He had enabled my mother's favoritism and funded Spencer's delusions with a detached, cowardly silence. He had gladly let them do the dirty work while he maintained clean hands. He had let my phone ring out for weeks when I tried to warn them. I watched the screen flash for several seconds. The vibration pulsed in a steady, urgent rhythm. It was time to stop listening to the echoes of their panic and confront the source directly. I set my coffee mug down, reached across the table, and finally decided to pick up an incoming call from Richard. I slid my finger across the smooth glass screen, accepting the call. I did not offer a greeting. I simply lifted the phone to my ear and listened to the chaotic, frantic energy broadcasting from the other side of the world. Through the tiny speaker, I could hear the absolute devastation of the Hamptons' wedding reception unfolding in real time. The background noise was a symphony of destruction. I heard the aggressive, sharp voices of Jada's father's corporate security team shouting instructions, the frantic clinking of fine crystal as caterers rushed to pack away expensive inventory they realized they would never be paid for, and somewhere in the distance, Spencer's muffled, pathetic wailing. Then my father's voice pierced through the static. He attempted to project his usual booming corporate authority, the exact intimidating tone he had utilized for decades to bully subordinates and silence my mother. But today, the foundation of that authority was completely gone. His voice shook violently, cracking with a desperate underlying terror that he could not disguise. "Riley, what the hell do you think you are doing?" Richard barked, his breathing heavy and ragged. "You need to call your people in New York right now. Call your lawyers and tell them this is a massive mistake. You are going to cancel this debt, tear up those papers, and fix this entire mess. You are going to do it right now out of basic family loyalty. Do you hear me?" I took a slow, deep breath, letting the warm, fragrant Balinese breeze wash over my skin. The sheer audacity of the man was almost impressive. He was standing waist-deep in the wreckage of a fraudulent life he had helped finance, barking orders at the woman who currently held the deed to his entire existence. My response was ice-cold and utterly unflinching. "Family loyalty," I asked, keeping my volume low and perfectly even. "That is an incredibly interesting concept coming from you, Richard. Let us examine your definition of family loyalty." Where exactly was that loyalty when your golden boy extorted me for $35,000 to cover his catastrophic investments? Where was that profound sense of family when you called me a failure, threatened to publicly disown me, and demanded I pay for a lavish rehearsal dinner I was explicitly excluded from? You did not care about family then. You cared about maintaining a wealthy aesthetic at my expense. This is different, he shouted, his voice pitching higher, losing the last remnants of his patriarchal control. This is our lives. This is your brother. He is not my brother, I corrected sharply, cutting him off. He is a severe financial liability. And this is not a petty family dispute over a dinner bill. This is high-stakes finance. Spencer willingly signed a legally binding contract for a $2.5 million predatory bridge loan. He leveraged assets he did not own and assumed a staggering 28% interest rate he could never possibly pay. I did not force him to take that money. I just bought the paper from his original lender. He wanted to play the part of a ruthless corporate titan, and he lost. The silence on the line was profound. The corporate mask completely shattered, leaving behind a terrified, broken old man who had bet his entire secure reality on a losing hand. When Richard finally spoke again, the anger was entirely gone, replaced by a reedy, pathetic pleading that made my skin crawl. "Riley, please," he begged, the word catching painfully in his throat. "You do not understand what you are doing. The collateral." Spencer used his phantom shell company as collateral, but the private equity bank required a legitimate guarantor to release those funds. Your mother and I believed in him. We thought his tech startup was actually taking off. We put up the Connecticut estate. We secretly signed a second mortgage to guarantee his bridge loan. If you execute this foreclosure, if you seize his assets to cover the defaulted debt, the bank will instantly trigger the default clause on our property. We will lose everything. We will be bankrupt. You will be making your own parents homeless. I looked out at the pristine turquoise water stretching toward the horizon. I searched myself for a fraction of sympathy, a single drop of familial guilt. I felt absolutely nothing. There was only a profound, settling peace. "I understand exactly what I am doing," I replied, my voice steady, resolute, and devoid of any emotion. "You chose to finance a fraud. You looked the other way while he stole, lied, and manipulated his way through his entire adult life because he gave you the illusion of prestige and power. You wanted the billionaire father-in-law and the Hamptons mansion so badly that you risked your own survival to get it. You enabled a monster and bet your retirement on his lies. That is your consequence, not my responsibility." "You cannot do this!" Richard wailed, his voice breaking into a full, humiliating sob. "We are your parents. You are destroying us." "I am simply balancing the ledger," I said quietly. "Goodbye, Richard." I pulled the phone away from my ear, immediately cutting off his frantic, tearful screaming, and pressed the red button to end the call. The tropical silence that rushed back into my cabana was glorious. I opened my phone settings, navigating directly to my contacts list. I tapped Richard's name, scrolled to the bottom of his profile, and selected Block Caller. I did the exact same thing for Patricia. Then I found Spencer's number and blocked him too. With 3 simple taps on a glass screen, I permanently severed the toxic, suffocating ties that had bound me to them for 30 years. Finally, I opened my secure email application and drafted a new message directly to my lead attorney in Manhattan. I left the subject line completely blank. The body of the email contained only 6 definitive words. Execute the foreclosure. No settlements. I hit send, placed the phone face down on the polished glass table, and picked up my mimosa. The legal machinery in New York moved with terrifying, beautiful efficiency. My attorneys did not hesitate, and they offered 0 extensions. Within 48 hours, the foreclosure was public record. The dominoes fell exactly as I had calculated, but watching it happen was far more satisfying than visualizing the spreadsheets. Spencer was officially forced into Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The bank moved with ruthless speed, seizing his leased luxury vehicles straight out of the Hamptons mansion driveway while the catering crew was still cleaning up the shattered crystal. His fraudulent corporate accounts were frozen, audited, and aggressively liquidated to pay off pennies on the dollar to his various furious creditors. Jada, demonstrating the raw survival instincts of a seasoned social climber, wasted absolutely no time mourning the relationship. She filed for a rapid annulment before the weekend was even over, citing gross financial fraud and intentional misrepresentation. Her legal team was spectacular, building an ironclad firewall to ensure she was completely insulated from Spencer's radioactive debt profile. But the legal separation was not enough to salvage her carefully cultivated brand. She needed a public sacrifice, and Spencer was the perfect target. She immediately launched a massive, highly coordinated damage control tour. For 3 consecutive weeks, she appeared on every major lifestyle and pop culture podcast that would give her a microphone. I listened to a few of them during my morning commutes. She expertly played the role of the traumatized, deceived victim, publicly dissecting Spencer's lies and actively distancing herself from the scammer she had almost married. She exposed his fake hedge fund, his rented watches, and his fabricated family wealth. She monetized her own ruined wedding to save her social standing, transforming a humiliating disaster into a profitable victim narrative. She left Spencer to burn in the ashes of his destroyed reputation, ensuring he would never be hired in the financial sector ever again. The collateral damage extended exactly where the contract dictated. Richard and Patricia had bet their entire upper-class existence on the illusion of Spencer's success, and the house always wins. The bank moved aggressively on the default clause tied to their Connecticut estate. The secret second mortgage they had signed to guarantee Spencer's toxic bridge loan was called in entirely. Because Spencer had zero liquidity and absolutely no assets to his name, the bank seized my parents' home. I received the weekly legal updates from my team detailing the foreclosure process. Richard and Patricia were given exactly 30 days to vacate the sprawling, manicured property where they had spent decades hosting arrogant dinner parties and curating their neighborhood supremacy. They were forced to hold a humiliating, highly publicized estate sale. They had to liquidate their antique furniture, the grand piano my mother loved to show off but never played, and her entire collection of imported crystal just to cover their immediate, desperate legal fees. Their former friends and country club associates flocked to the sale, picking over the remains of their lives at bargain prices. With their credit completely obliterated and their retirement savings vaporized by the default, they had no choices left. They were forced to move into a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom retirement apartment in a decidedly unremarkable working-class suburb. There were no more country club memberships. There were no more catered holiday parties. Richard's former golf buddies stopped returning his calls. Patricia could no longer show her face at her high-end salon. They were trapped in a suffocatingly small space, forced to live out their remaining days facing each other and the crushing weight of their own monumental miscalculation. They had eagerly sacrificed their discarded scapegoat daughter to fund the delusions of their golden child. Now they had to sit in their cramped living room smelling cheap carpet instead of fresh peonies, entirely aware that the son they worshipped was a certified fraud, and the daughter they threw away was the architect of their ruin and the sole owner of a multi-million-dollar empire. Spencer could not handle the silence. Stripped of his enablers, abandoned by his fiancée, and facing absolute terrifying ruin, his desperation drove him to make one final pathetic attempt at salvation. 3 weeks after I returned from Bali to my Manhattan headquarters, my receptionist buzzed my intercom. She informed me, her tone laced with crisp, professional disdain, that a frantic man claiming to be my brother was in the lobby, loudly demanding to see me. I pulled up the live security feed on my office monitor. Spencer was pacing frantically in the sleek, marble-lined lobby of my building. He looked entirely unrecognizable. The custom-tailored suits, the expensive haircut, and the arrogant swagger were completely gone. He wore a rumpled, faded jacket, his hair was unwashed, and his face was pale and gaunt from weeks of panic and sleepless nights. He was arguing with the front desk staff, waving his arms wildly and begging for just 5 minutes of my time. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to negotiate. He still delusionally believed he could use his old charm to talk his way out of the abyss. I did not go down to meet him. I did not buzz him up to my floor. I simply pressed the intercom button and gave a clear direct order to my head of security. Through the high-definition monitor, I watched two massive, unsmiling security guards step out of the elevators and approach Spencer. He tried to argue with them, pointing desperately toward the executive elevator bank, but they gave him no quarter. They flanked him, grabbed him firmly by the arms, and physically marched him across the lobby toward the heavy glass revolving doors. He dragged his feet, visibly shouting my name, but the sound was completely cut off by the thick, soundproof glass as the doors sealed shut behind him. I switched my monitor to the exterior street camera feed. Spencer stumbled onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk, nearly colliding with a pedestrian. He looked around wildly, a small, insignificant man, completely swallowed by the towering skyscrapers and the rushing, indifferent crowds. He patted his empty pockets, perhaps realizing he could not even afford a subway fare back to wherever he was currently crashing. He was entirely stripped of his power, his manufactured wealth, and his towering ego. He stood completely alone on the cold concrete for a long minute. Then slowly he turned and walked away, disappearing into the city. I let the security feed run on my secondary monitor for another 60 seconds, watching the empty stretch of Manhattan's sidewalk, where my brother's manufactured empire had finally met its absolute undeniable end. Then with a single keystroke, I closed the window. The screen went dark, and the faint hum of my laptop's cooling fan faded into the background. I stepped away from the sleek mahogany desk of my makeshift tropical office and walked out onto the expansive teak deck of my villa. The transition was immediate and profound. 12 time zones away from the cold, unforgiving concrete of New York, the sun was just beginning its majestic ascent over the pristine white sands of Nusa Dua. The Balinese morning air was thick, fragrant with blooming frangipani and the crisp, salty tang of the Indian Ocean. I slipped off my sandals and stepped down onto the beach, letting the fine, powdery sand sink between my toes. The tropical sun washed over my face, its heat acting as a physical balm seeping deep into my skin and warming bones that felt as though they had been chilled for 3 decades. The suffocating weight of my family's expectations, the decades of quiet belittlement, and the frantic, chaotic noise of their downfall had completely evaporated. The atmosphere here was untouched by their panic. My tablet chimed a soft, pleasant marimba tone cutting through the rhythmic crash of the morning surf. I tapped the screen to answer the scheduled video call. Julian, my lead structural architect, appeared on the high-definition display. He was sitting in his brightly lit Boston office, surrounded by rolled drafting paper and physical models. He did not look like a man preparing to flip a foreclosed residential property to the highest bidder. He looked like a man building a legacy. "Good morning, Riley." Julian smiled, adjusting his heavy, dark-rimmed glasses. "Or I suppose good evening for you. I have the finalized 3D renderings for the Connecticut estate ready for your approval. The demolition permits cleared the city council yesterday afternoon." He shared his screen, and my breath caught slightly in my throat as the digital models slowly rendered. When I executed the foreclosure on Richard and Patricia's sprawling, pretentious estate, the financial sector assumed I was going to liquidate the asset to recoup the principal on Spencer's toxic loan. My parents assumed I was taking their home out of pure malicious spite. They were both entirely wrong. I had zero intention of selling my grandfather's land to some faceless hedge fund manager. I was taking it back to fulfill a promise. Grandpa Theodore had not been a man who cared about country club memberships or imported crystal. He had been a creator, a self-taught craftsman who believed that raw, unfunded talent was the most wasted resource in the country. He had always dreamed of turning his vast property into a sanctuary for young, brilliant minds who lacked the financial backing to break into the elitist design industry. My parents had buried that dream the moment they inherited the property, prioritizing perfectly manicured lawns and exclusive garden parties over his philanthropic vision. I was simply correcting their error. "The main structural teardowns begin next week," Julian explained, highlighting the digital blueprints with a stylus. "We are completely gutting the primary residence. The formal dining room and those ridiculous vaulted entertaining spaces are being converted into open-concept drafting studios and digital media labs. We knocked down the walls of the master suite to create the central fabrication workshop. The natural light up there is going to be spectacular. I zoomed in on the rendering of the grounds. Patricia's prized, meticulously curated rose gardens, the ones she had weaponized against the neighborhood association for years, were entirely gone. In their place, Julian had designed an expansive outdoor sculpture garden and collaborative community workspaces. "It is perfect, Julian," I said, my voice thick with genuine emotion. "Proceed with the construction schedule immediately. The endowment is fully funded and the board of directors for the conservatory is ready to begin the scholarship review process by autumn." "Your grandfather would be incredibly proud, Riley," Julian replied softly before ending the call. I lowered the tablet and looked out at the vast, shimmering expanse of the ocean. Society dictates a very specific script for family estrangement. You are supposed to feel a lingering sense of guilt, a heavy, tragic sadness about severing the ties of blood, no matter how toxic those ties had become. You are supposed to mourn the loss. I searched my heart, waiting for the guilt to materialize. I waited for the phantom pang of regret for sending my parents to a cramped retirement apartment, or for watching my brother get physically tossed onto a Manhattan street. Nothing came. There was only absolute crystalline peace. The toxicity, the gaslighting, the relentless demand that I shrink myself so Spencer could stand taller, it had all been surgically permanently removed from my life. I had not merely survived their abuse. I had dismantled the very system that empowered them. I had reclaimed my grandfather's legacy, transformed my own pain into undeniable power, and secured a future where no one would ever dictate my worth again. I turned to face the camera, looking directly through the lens, to the millions of people who had watched this tragedy unfold. People say blood is thicker than water, but they forget that poison runs in bloodstreams too. Sometimes the only way to survive is to become the cure they never saw coming. Have you ever had to use ruthlessness to protect your own peace? Tell me your story in the comments. The most profound lesson from Riley's journey is that true empowerment never comes from seeking the approval of a toxic family, but from having the courage to build your own legacy. For years, Riley was treated as the invisible scapegoat, while her deceitful brother was celebrated. However, instead of letting their cruelty break her, she channeled her resilience into quiet, strategic success. Ultimately, she reclaimed her grandfather's dream, proving that our worth is never defined by those who refuse to recognize it. Have you ever had to walk away to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below.